Some nights in the Nevada desert hold secrets deeper than the darkness itself. This was one of those nights, the kind that changes lives and reveals truths long buried beneath layers of military protocol and classified operations. High above Nellie's Air Force Base, a lone fighter jet traced patterns against the stars, piloted by a woman who would soon face the most important decision of her career. The air was still, almost unnaturally so, as if the desert itself was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. In less than 24 hours, everything Major Catherine Harrison believed about duty, honor, and the price of doing what's right would be tested in ways she never imagined. Major Catherine, Kate, Harrison felt the aircraft respond to her touch, an extension of her own body after thousands of flight hours. The G-force pressed her into the seat as she executed a flawless Immelman turn, inverting the fighter before pulling through to level flight. Her breathing remained controlled despite the crushing 9G pressure that would have rendered most pilots unconscious. Through the canopy, the world inverted then righted itself, stars and Earth trading places in a ballet of momentum and precision. Viper lead, this is control. Your metrics are exceptional. That's enough showboating for today. Return to base. Kate smiled beneath her oxygen mask. Roger that, control, just keeping the boys honest. She banked the Eagle gently, its wingtip seeming to trace the mountain ridges below. On her wrist, beneath the G-suit sleeve, sat her father's Omega Speedmaster, a timepiece that had logged more combat hours than most career pilots. Colonel William Harrison had worn it through 3 wars before his final mission over Iraq in '91. Now it kept time for his daughter, marking seconds in a profession where 3 of them often meant the difference between life and death. In dogfights and life, her father had always said, you never have more than 3 seconds to make a decision that matters. The landing lights of Nellie's appeared on the horizon, a constellation of human making beneath the ancient stars. Kate's gloved thumb brushed across the watch face momentarily, a ritual she performed before every landing, a gesture to the man who had taught her to fly before she could drive, whose ghost still occupied the cockpit beside her during every mission. The wheels touched down with textbook precision. As the thrust reversers engaged and the aircraft decelerated, Kate allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd outperformed every other pilot in today's evaluation at the Fighter Weapons School, the Air Force's elite Top Gun program. Not that the accomplishment would silence the whispers that followed her through the hangars and briefing rooms. Daddy's wings, they called her, those who resented both her gender and her lineage. The nickname was meant to wound, to imply she'd earned her position through her father's legacy rather than her own merit. What they failed to understand was that being Colonel Harrison's daughter had never opened doors. It had only created expectations so towering they blocked out the sun. The maintenance crew approached as she powered down the aircraft. Kate removed her helmet, allowing her dark hair to fall free. At 32, her face bore the weathered determination of someone who had spent a lifetime fighting currents both in the air and on the ground. Her blue eyes, her father's eyes, everyone said, scanned the tarmac with the automatic situational awareness that kept pilots alive. "She's running smooth, Major," said the crew chief after completing his inspection. "Whatever tweaks you requested on the energy management system are paying off. Best performance metrics we've recorded." Kate nodded. Her specialty had always been energy management in combat maneuvers, maintaining kinetic energy when others would bleed it off, converting potential to kinetic in ways that defied conventional flight patterns. It was a skill born from instinct more than training, something that couldn't be taught. "The old girl still has some surprises in her," she replied, patting the fuselage with genuine affection. The debriefing room buzzed with conversation when she entered. 20 pilots from the current Fighter Weapons School class sat reviewing their performance data, comparing notes, building the camaraderie that would someday save their lives in combat. The room quieted momentarily as she walked in, a familiar response that she had learned to ignore. Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, the program director, barely looked up from his clipboard. "Good numbers today, Harrison, but that last maneuver pushed the envelope on our safety protocols." "The envelope needed pushing, sir." She took her seat, noting the half-hidden smirks from some of the younger pilots. "Enemy fighters won't observe our safety protocols." Patterson allowed himself a thin smile. "Save the philosophy for the classroom. You're on the instructor rotation tomorrow, 600. As the meeting concluded and pilots filed out, Kate felt a presence linger behind her. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Dan Sullivan, her right hand and flight second, leaned against the doorframe. At 45, he was a relic by fighter pilot standards, a Gulf War veteran who had refused promotions that would take him out of the cockpit. "Those kids don't know what to make of you," he said, amusement crinkling the corners of his eyes. "A woman who can pull 9GS without a grunt, and the daughter of Bill Harrison to boot." Kate gathered her notes. "They'll figure it out when I'm done with them tomorrow." Dan fell into step beside her as they walked toward the officers' quarters. "Your father would have enjoyed the show today. That inverse role was pure Bill." The mention of her father didn't sting the way it once had. Time had transformed grief into a quieter companion. "He would have criticized my angle of attack on the reentry." "Damn right he would have," Dan chuckled. "That man never gave a compliment until you were halfway out the door." The officers' club was dimly lit, the evening crowd sparse. In the corner booth that had become unofficially reserved for them, the rest of her crew awaited. They called themselves the Vipers, a tight-knit unit forged through years of missions that spanned 3 continents. Thump, thump, thump. The rhythmic sound came from Master Sergeant Frank Mitchell, who was absent-mindedly bouncing his challenge coin on the wooden table. The Special Forces coin, emblazoned with their motto, "Upward and Onward," was a sacred object among them, a symbol of belonging that transcended rank and regulation. "There she is," Frank announced. At 35, the barrel-chested former Marine had forearms like steel cables and a mechanical genius that bordered on supernatural. "The ace of Nellie strikes again." "The instructor pilots are writing up new regulations because of you," added Lieutenant Maria Mari Santos, the team's combat medic and gunner. Her Cuban-American heritage showed in her expressive hands as she spoke. Something about excessive G-force showmanship. The final member of their circle, Technical Sergeant Dave Chen, didn't look up from the laptop where his fingers danced across the keyboard. As their electronic warfare specialist, he lived half in the physical world and half in the digital one. "The security servers are buzzing about tomorrow. Something big is coming in." Kate slid into the booth, accepting the coffee that Dan pushed toward her. "Define big." Dave finally looked up, his pale eyes serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Red Flag is launching early. Full deployment, all assets. The biggest exercise in 5 years." Red Flag. The name sent a current of electricity through Kate. The Air Force's premier combat training event was the closest thing to war without actual shooting. Over 100 aircraft from multiple branches and allied nations, engaging in complex battle scenarios over the Nevada Test and Training Range. A chance to prove oneself against the best. "We're already on the roster," Dan confirmed, sliding a folder across the table. "Viper Squadron gets the prime slot, aggressors against the F-22 and F-35 trainees." Kate felt a surge of satisfaction as she reviewed the mission parameters. Leading the opposition force was a coveted position, and a validation of her abilities that no one could attribute to her father's name. "Death Valley Sector," she noted, examining the map coordinates. Rough terrain, minimal radar coverage. They're really throwing the rookies into the deep end. Frank grinned. Those F-35 jockeys think their stealth technology makes them invincible. Time for some old-school dogfighting to humble them. The conversation turned technical as they dissected strategies and tactics for the coming exercise. This was where Kate felt most at home, surrounded by people who judged her solely on her merits, who had seen her lead through storms both meteorological and metaphorical. Hours later, as the others dispersed to their quarters, Kate lingered in the empty club. The wall of honor drew her gaze, photographs of fallen pilots arranged chronologically, a visual history of sacrifice spanning generations. Her father's image watched her from the center section, his expression stern beneath his helmet, eyes that mirrored her own staring into the camera with unwavering intensity. "Still got those eyes on me, huh?" she whispered to the photograph. Colonel William "Bill" Harrison had become a legend during Operation Desert Storm, leading a daring rescue mission that saved an entire squadron trapped behind enemy lines. His final act, diverting anti-aircraft fire away from a damaged transport filled with wounded soldiers, had earned him a posthumous Medal of Honor, and his daughter a childhood heavy with expectation. Kate touched the frame lightly. "Red flag tomorrow, Dad, the big show." The desert night had cooled considerably when she finally emerged, the sky a velvet canopy pricked with starlight. In 6 hours, she would be briefing young pilots, molding them into warriors worthy of the aircraft they commanded. In 24, she would be leading her team against the newest generation of American air power. She checked her father's watch. The second hand swept smoothly around the dial, counting down to whatever waited on the horizon. Morning came with the relentless brightness unique to the Nevada desert. By 600, Kate stood before 30 fresh-faced pilots in the main briefing room, their expressions ranging from eagerness to thinly veiled skepticism as they regarded their female instructor. "Combat flying isn't about technology," she began, pacing before the tactical display showing various aircraft specifications. "The F-35 is a technological marvel with sensors that can track a Sparrow at 50 miles. But when the systems fail, and they will fail, what remains is the pilot's judgment, instinct, and grit." She clicked to the next slide, showing a complex energy management diagram that tracked potential and kinetic energy through various maneuvers. "This is where dogfights are won, not with missiles fired beyond visual range, but in that moment when you've bled off too much energy and your opponent hasn't." Her finger traced the critical curve on the graph. 3 seconds. That's your window to recognize the situation and respond. 3 seconds between victory and a fiery descent. A hand raised in the back row. A young lieutenant with the confident posture of someone who had never faced real adversity. "With respect, Major, modern air combat doesn't come down to dogfighting anymore. The last real visual range engagement was decades ago." Kate let the comment hang in the air, studying the lieutenant carefully. "Your name, officer?" "Taylor, ma'am, Robert Taylor." Something clicked in her memory. Any relation to Captain Richard Taylor, F-16 Squadron, Gulf War. The young man straightened perceptibly. "My father, ma'am." Kate nodded slowly. Richard Taylor had flown with her father on that final mission. He'd survived the encounter that had claimed Bill Harrison, going on to complete a distinguished career before retiring as a colonel. Their families had lost touch over the years, a common occurrence in military circles where relationships were severed and reformed with each new deployment. "Your father would disagree with you, Lieutenant Taylor," she said, her voice gentler than before. "He survived an encounter with a MiG-29 that had every technological advantage because he understood energy management better than his opponent. Ask him about it sometime." The classroom atmosphere shifted subtly, the skepticism giving way to a more respectful attention. Kate continued the briefing, detailing the various scenarios they would encounter in the coming days during Red Flag. "You'll be flying against the most experienced aggressor pilots in the Air Force," she concluded. "We won't fight fair. We won't follow the expected playbook, because that's exactly what a real adversary would do." As the pilots filed out at the end of the session, Lieutenant Taylor lingered behind. Up close, Kate could see the resemblance to his father, the same determined set to his jaw, the same evaluating gaze. "My father speaks highly of yours," he said finally. "Says he was the best pilot he ever flew with." Kate felt the familiar complex emotion that such comments always evoked, pride mingled with the permanent ache of loss. They were a good team. Taylor hesitated, then added, "He also said your father broke formation to draw fire away from his damaged aircraft. Said he never would have made it home to see me born if not for Colonel Harrison." The revelation hit her with unexpected force. She had heard many versions of her father's final mission, but this detail, that his sacrifice had ensured Taylor's birth, was new. "I didn't know that," she admitted quietly. "My call sign is Bobby," Taylor said with a half-smile. "Not very original for a first-year pilot, but it works." "Well, Bobby," Kate replied, regaining her composure, "make sure you're sharp for tomorrow. Red Flag doesn't forgive mistakes." After he departed, Kate remained in the empty classroom processing the encounter. The military was full of such connections, lives intersecting across generations, debts of honor passed from parent to child. Her father had saved Taylor's father, and now she was teaching Taylor's son. The wheel kept turning. Her radio crackled to life, interrupting her thoughts. "Viper lead, this is Dan. Full squadron briefing moved up to 1400 hours. General Reynolds wants to address all Red Flag participants personally." "Copy that, on my way." The main hangar had been transformed into an impromptu briefing theater, with over 100 pilots and support crew arranged in concentric semicircles facing a stage erected at one end. The air buzzed with anticipation. Red Flag exercises were always significant events, but the scale of this one suggested something beyond the ordinary. Kate found her team already seated in the third row. Dan nodded toward the stage, where a cluster of senior officers conferred in low voices. "That's a lot of brass," he murmured as she took her seat. "3 generals and enough colonels to start a coup." "Any intel on what's happening?" she asked Dave, who was, as usual, somehow connected to information streams invisible to others. He shook his head slightly. "Systems are locked down tight. Whatever this is, it's classified several levels above my pay grade." A hush fell over the assembly as Major General Thomas Reynolds stepped to the podium. At 62, Reynolds was a living connection to another era of aerial warfare. He had flown F-4 Phantoms in Vietnam, facing Soviet-built MiGs in the skies over Hanoi. His weathered face bore the permanent squint of someone who had spent decades scanning horizons for danger. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice graveled by years of barking orders through oxygen masks, "Red Flag 2023 will represent the most sophisticated aerial combat exercise in history." The general gestured to the giant screen behind him, which illuminated with a topographical map of the Nevada Test and Training Range. The sprawling military reservation covered thousands of square miles of desert, mountains, and valleys, a perfect proxy for the varied terrain of potential combat theaters worldwide. "For the first time, we will be integrating every fifth-generation fighter in our inventory, alongside legacy aircraft and multinational forces. 120 of the finest combat pilots in the world will engage in a 3-day continuous operation. The map zoomed in on a particular region, Death Valley, and the surrounding mountains. The exercise will center on Area 25, the most challenging terrain in our training range. Limited visibility, extreme temperatures, restricted communications, and natural radar shadows will test both your aircraft and your resolve. Kate studied the terrain with professional interest. The deep valleys and high ridges would indeed complicate both navigation and targeting. It was pilot country, where technology gave way to skill and instinct. Weather conditions are expected to be particularly demanding, Reynolds continued. Seasonal sandstorms are forecast throughout the exercise window. Consider this an added element of realism. Our adversaries don't schedule their aggression around clear skies. The briefing continued for another hour as various officers detailed specific mission parameters, rules of engagement, and safety protocols. The Viper Squadron's role as primary aggressors was confirmed, with Kate's team assigned to lead the opposition against the most advanced F-22 and F-35 units. As the assembly dispersed, General Reynolds approached Kate directly. His expression was unreadable as he stopped before her. "Major Harrison," he acknowledged with a curt nod, "your aggressor tactics review was impressive. Creative use of terrain masking to nullify stealth advantages." "Thank you, sir." Reynolds studied her with eyes that had witnessed the evolution of air combat over 4 decades. "Your father used similar approaches against the Iraqis. Effective then, still effective now." The comparison didn't rankle her as it might have years earlier. "Good tactics age well, sir." "Indeed." He paused, then added more quietly, "This exercise is more important than most of these pilots realize, Major. The next generation needs to understand that technology is not infallible. That lesson sometimes comes at too high a price in actual combat." Something in his tone caught her attention, an undercurrent of concern that seemed at odds with the routine nature of a training exercise, however large. "Is there something specific we should be prepared for, General?" Reynolds hesitated, an unusual moment of uncertainty from a man known for decisive command. "Just ensure your pilots are operating at their absolute best. Expect the unexpected." Before she could press further, he was summoned away by his aide, leaving Kate with a vague sense of disquiet. "What was that about?" Dan asked, appearing at her side. "I'm not sure," she replied, watching the general's retreating form. "But something about this exercise feels off." The pre-dawn darkness enveloped the flight line as pilots and ground crew prepared for the first day of Red Flag. Aircraft engines hummed to life one by one, their running lights creating a constellation across the tarmac. Inside the ready room, Kate completed her final checks with the Viper team. "Weather reports confirm heavy sandstorm activity developing in the exercise zone," she informed them, studying the satellite imagery. "Visibility will be compromised within 2 hours of mission start." Frank adjusted his flight suit with practiced movements. "The rookies won't be ready for those conditions. Half of them have never flown in anything worse than a summer shower." "That's the point," Dan interjected. "Red Flag isn't about confirming what they can already do, it's about exposing what they can't." Dave looked up from his tactical tablet. "Latest intelligence update shows they've added a cyber warfare component. Possible electronic countermeasures against our guidance systems." "Sounds like they're throwing everything at these trainees," Mari observed, checking her medical kit one final time before stowing it. "Are we testing pilots or breaking them?" Kate considered this as she sealed the collar of her flight suit. "Sometimes you have to break something to rebuild it stronger." They moved as a unit toward their aircraft. Two F-15E Strike Eagles for Kate and Dan, and a specially modified HH-60G Pave Hawk helicopter for the others. The helicopter would serve as their mobile command post, allowing Frank, Mari, and Dave to coordinate the broader aggressor force from within the battle space. As Kate climbed into her cockpit, she noticed Lieutenant Bobby Taylor preparing his F-35 nearby. He offered a respectful salute, which she returned before focusing on her pre-flight checklist. The radio crackled as aircraft across the base reported ready status. One by one, the participants of Red Flag received clearance and lifted into the gradually lightening sky. Kate's F-15 rose smoothly, the powerful engines pushing her back into her seat with familiar force. Above the base, the formation assembled, dozens of the world's most advanced combat aircraft arranging themselves in a choreography of thrust and lift. Red Flag participants, this is Control. Exercise commences at 700 hours. Good hunting. The formation split as aircraft headed toward their assigned starting positions. Kate led her aggressor team toward the western edge of the range, the rising sun at their backs, a tactical advantage that had decided aerial engagements since the dawn of combat flight. Viper lead to all Viper elements, she broadcast to her squadron. Maintain radio discipline from this point forward. You have your assignments. Make them earn every inch of sky. The acknowledgments came back crisp and professional. These were experienced pilots who understood their role in forging the next generation of air warriors. As they reached their designated holding pattern, Kate observed the distant forms of the Blue Force, trainee aircraft taking position across the battlespace. The F-22s gleamed like silver arrowheads in the morning light, while the stealthier F-35s were harder to track visually, dark shapes that seemed to absorb rather than reflect sunlight. "Viper command to Viper lead," came Frank's voice from the Pave Hawk. "Weather system intensifying faster than predicted. Sand storm front moving in from the southwest, currently 30 miles out." Kate checked her tactical display, noting the approaching weather system. "Copy that. All Viper elements adjust tactics for reduced visibility conditions. Prepare for Phase 1 initiation." At precisely 700, the exercise began. The first engagements were straightforward, probing attacks designed to test the trainees' adherence to doctrine. Kate held back her more advanced tactics, observing how the F-22 and F-35 pilots responded to standard threats. "They're relying too heavily on their sensors," she noted to Dan as they circled back after the initial skirmish. "Not a single visual confirmation attempt." "New generation," Dan replied, his voice tinged with the gentle contempt of experience. "They trust their machines more than their instincts." The exercise intensified as the morning progressed. Kate led her squadron in increasingly complex attack patterns, exploiting the terrain to mask their approaches. The sand storm arrived as predicted, reducing visibility and creating conditions where the advanced sensors of the fifth-generation fighters became less reliable. "Now we'll see what they're really made of," Kate murmured, banking her F-15 into a steep valley where radar signals scattered against the rock walls. For the next hour, the aggressor forces dominated the engagement. The trainees, deprived of their technological advantages, struggled to maintain cohesion. Kate's tactics, which emphasized visual confirmation and energy management over sensor-based targeting, proved devastatingly effective. "Viper lead, this is Control. Phase 1 complete. Return to designated holding area for Phase 2 briefing." As Kate acknowledged the order and banked toward the rendezvous point, Dave's voice cut across the command frequency. "Viper command to all elements. We're tracking an anomaly in the battlespace communications. multiple trainees reporting simultaneous navigation system failures. Kate frowned. Could be part of the exercise parameters, electronic warfare simulation. Negative, Dave replied, his typically calm voice edged with concern. This isn't in the script. Their emergency beacons are activating. Before Kate could respond, Control's voice returned, this time with unmistakable urgency. All red flag participants exercise suspended. Code Delta. Repeat, Code Delta. All aircraft return to base immediately. Code Delta. Real-world emergency. Kate felt a spike of adrenaline as she processed the implications. Viper lead to Control, requesting situation update. The response came not from the regular controller but from General Reynolds himself. Viper lead, we have multiple aircraft experiencing critical systems failures. Possible widespread effect across all participating platforms. Return to base immediately. Sir, my systems are functioning normally, Kate reported, scanning her instrumentation. Permission to assist affected aircraft. Negative, Major. All functional aircraft are to clear the area. Recovery operations are being initiated. The terse response raised immediate red flags. Recovery operations meant aircraft down, possibly multiple aircraft. Kate's training and instincts collided as she considered her options. Viper lead to Viper command, what's your status? Maintaining position at 10,000 feet above the northern ridge, Frank replied. We're monitoring emergency frequencies. It's bad, Kate. Multiple mayday calls, then silence. The sandstorm is intensifying, now covering 60% of the exercise zone. Dan's voice joined the conversation. Lead, I'm picking up scattered emergency beacon signals from the Central Valley, at least a dozen distinct sources. Kate made a quick calculation. Dan, form on my wing. Will complete one reconnaissance pass before returning to base. Viper lead, this is Control. Your orders are to return immediately. Acknowledge. The steel in General Reynolds' voice was unmistakable, but something deeper than military discipline pulled at Kate's conscience, a responsibility that transcended the chain of command. Control, this is Viper lead. We are experiencing communication difficulties. Will return when systems stabilize. It was a thin pretext, one that would likely result in disciplinary action. But as she banked her F-15 toward the Central Valley where the beacons originated, Kate knew there was no other choice she could live with. Dan's aircraft slid into formation beside her. You know this is insubordination, he commented, though his actions belied any real objection. Noted in your report, she replied, pushing through the thickening wall of sand that now obscured the valley. The visibility dropped precipitously as they descended. Kate switched to infrared imaging, but even those sensors struggled to penetrate the maelstrom of sand and dust. Below them, the complex terrain of Death Valley became a treacherous maze, invisible until they were nearly upon it. Switch to terrain following radar, she instructed Dan. 300 feet minimum clearance. They weaved through the canyon system, guided more by instinct than instrumentation. The emergency beacons grew stronger as they approached the center of the valley, a narrow gorge where the walls rose nearly vertically on either side. I've got visual on a heat signature, Dan reported. 2 o'clock low appears to be a downed aircraft, F-35 configuration. Kate peered through the swirling sand. The distinctive outline of an F-35 emerged, resting at an unnatural angle against the valley floor. No signs of fire or explosion, suggesting the pilot might have managed a controlled crash landing. Marking coordinates, she confirmed, continuing sweep pattern. For the next 20 minutes, they cataloged crash sites across the valley. The pattern was alarming, aircraft scattered in a rough line, as if they had dropped from the sky in sequence. No communications from any of the pilots, only the automated beacons signaling distress. "I count 14 distinct crash sites," Dan summarized grimly. "No visual on survivors from this altitude." Kate checked her fuel state. "We need to get this information back to base. Recovery teams will need precise coordinates." As they banked to depart the valley, a final beacon signal caught her attention, weaker than the others, but pulsing with an irregular pattern that suggested manual activation rather than automated deployment. One more pass, she decided, steering toward the signal's origin. At the far end of the valley, partially obscured by an overhanging rock formation, lay another F-35. Unlike the others, this one showed signs of a pilot's survival attempt. An emergency shelter had been erected beside the aircraft. "Viper lead to Viper command," Kate broadcast, hoping the Pave Hawk's more powerful communications array could penetrate the storm. "We have located multiple downed aircraft and at least one confirmed survivor, requesting immediate search and rescue deployment." The response came through broken and distorted. "Negative deployment, conditions prohibitive, return to base, assessment underway." Frustration surged through Kate as the implications became clear. The Air Force was standing down rescue operations until the storm passed, which could be hours or even days, judging by the weather patterns typical of the region. "Viper Command, did you copy our report of survivors?" Frank's voice came through clearer as the Pave Hawk adjusted its position to boost signal strength. "We copy. Viper lead. Control is ordering all aircraft to return. General Reynolds has declared the area unsafe for rescue operations until weather clears." Kate exchanged a glance with Dan through their canopies, reading the same concern in his expression that she felt. "Those pilots won't last long in these conditions," Dan observed quietly. "Daytime temperature in the valley is pushing 115 degrees, limited water, possible injuries." The weight of command settled on Kate's shoulders, a familiar pressure that her father had once described as the true test of leadership. Not the ability to follow orders, but knowing when to question them. "Viper Command, we're returning to base," she decided finally. "Maintain monitoring of emergency frequencies." As they climbed above the storm front, the sky cleared to reveal the distant outline of Nellie's Air Force Base. Kate's mind raced through protocols, regulations, and possibilities. By the time they touched down on the tarmac, she had formulated the beginning of a plan. The base was in controlled chaos when they arrived. Emergency vehicles staged on the runways, medical teams assembled, senior officers huddled in tense conversation. General Reynolds stood at the center of the command post established on the flight line, his face granite as he coordinated the response. Kate approached directly, still in her flight gear, the coordinates of the crash sites clutched in her hand. "Major Harrison," Reynolds acknowledged, his expression suggesting he had not forgotten her failure to immediately obey orders. "Your report." She handed him the data. 14 crash sites confirmed, sir. At least one survivor has established an emergency position. Given the pattern of failures and the simultaneous timing, this doesn't appear to be weather-related." The general studied the information, his expression unreadable. "Your assessment." "Some form of electronic countermeasure or system vulnerability," she stated. "The aircraft all went down in sequence along a specific corridor, suggesting they encountered the same failure trigger." Reynolds nodded slightly. "That aligns with our initial analysis. The question is whether it was an exercise parameter that went wrong or something else entirely." Those pilots need immediate extraction, sir, Kate pressed. The survival window in those conditions is limited. The general's jaw tightened. I'm aware of the survival parameters, Major. I'm also responsible for ensuring we don't lose additional aircraft and personnel in a rescue attempt that could encounter the same system failure. With respect, sir, my F-15 showed no signs of vulnerability. It's possible that only the fifth-generation aircraft were affected due to their common avionics architecture. Possible but unconfirmed, Reynolds countered. We have search and rescue assets staging now, but they will not deploy until we have identified the cause of the failures and can guarantee their safety. How long, sir? 24 hours minimum. The storm is expected to peak in intensity over the next 12 hours before beginning to dissipate. 24 hours. Kate calculated the survival prospects silently. With limited water, extreme heat, and possible injuries, many of those pilots wouldn't make it, including Bobby Taylor, whose aircraft she had personally identified among the crashed F-35s. Request permission to organize a ground rescue team, sir, she said. The Pave Hawk could drop personnel at the edge of the affected zone. We could proceed on foot to the crash sites. Reynolds shook his head firmly. Denied, Major. The risk assessment doesn't support that approach. We will proceed according to established protocols. Even if it means losing pilots who could be saved. The words escaped before she could filter them. Reynolds' expression hardened. You're dismissed, Major Harrison. Report to the command center in 2 hours for debriefing. Kate saluted stiffly and withdrew, finding the rest of her team waiting anxiously nearby. What's the word? Dan asked, reading the answer in her expression before she could respond. They're standing down rescue operations for at least 24 hours, she confirmed quietly, citing risk of additional failures and storm conditions. Dave shook his head in disbelief. Those pilots don't have 24 hours. I know. Kate looked around at her team, the people she had trained with, flown with, trusted with her life. Which is why we need to talk, privately. They gathered in the maintenance hangar where Frank had authority to clear personnel. Once alone among the hulking silhouettes of aircraft under repair, Kate outlined what she had seen in the valley. At least 14 aircraft down. One confirmed survivor signal, likely more unable to establish communications, and Bobby Taylor's F-35 is among them. The general's kid, Mari asked, surprise evident in her voice. No, Richard Taylor's son. My father flew with him in Desert Storm, saved his life. The significance wasn't lost on any of them. Military connections formed a web of obligation that sometimes transcended formal chains of command. What are you suggesting, Kate? Dan asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. She met each of their gazes in turn. I'm going after them, with or without authorization, but I won't ask any of you to risk your careers. A heavy silence fell over the group. Frank was the first to break it, his massive arms crossed over his chest. The Pave Hawk is fueled and ready. I've already stocked it with additional medical supplies. Mari nodded. I've got trauma kits prepared, enough to treat 20 casualties with severe injuries. The comms on the helicopter are modified to operate in conditions that would blind standard equipment, Dave added. And I've downloaded detailed topographical data of the valley. Dan was the last to speak, his weathered face solemn. Your father once told me that regulations exist to keep us safe, but courage exists to keep us human. He paused. I'm your co-pilot wherever we're going. Kate felt a surge of emotion that she quickly mastered. These weren't just colleagues. They were family, bound by something stronger than military discipline. You understand what this means, she said quietly. Best case scenario, we all face court-martial. Worst case, we don't come back, Dan finished. We understand. The plan came together quickly. They would wait until the shift change at dusk, when monitoring of the flight line was typically at its lowest. The Pave Hawk, already prepped for potential rescue operations, would require minimal preparation. Their window would be narrow, perhaps 30 minutes before the absence of both personnel and aircraft would be noticed. As the others attended to their assignments, Dan pulled Kate aside. You sure about this, kid? Your whole career, everything you've worked for. She glanced toward the wall of the hangar, where a faded photograph showed a squadron of F-4 Phantoms from the Vietnam era. Her father stood among the pilots, young and confident, unaware of the destiny that awaited him decades later. There's an old saying among rescue pilots, she replied. These things we do that others may live. Dan nodded, recognition in his eyes. Your father said that before that last mission. He did more than say it. Kate checked her watch, her father's watch. 3 hours until sunset. 3 hours to prepare for the most important mission of her life. He lived it. Now it's my turn. The sun began its descent toward the western ridges, casting long shadows across the base. Personnel shifted between duties, the normal rhythm of a military installation continuing despite the crisis atmosphere. In the hangar, Kate's team made final preparations with the focused efficiency of professionals who understood exactly what was at stake. Pre-flight checks complete, Dan reported, running his hand along the Pave Hawk's fuselage. She's ready to fly. Frank secured the last of the rescue equipment in the cabin. Extraction gear, medical supplies, emergency rations, enough for 48 hours in the field. Weather update, Dave announced, studying his tablet. The storm is intensifying faster than predicted. Visibility in the valley is now near zero. Surface temperatures dropping with nightfall but still in the high 90s. Mari completed her inventory of medical supplies. If we're facing multiple trauma patients with limited evacuation capacity, I'll need to perform triage and possibly field surgery. Kate absorbed their reports, feeling the weight of command settle more firmly on her shoulders. This wasn't a training exercise or even a standard combat mission. This was something else entirely, a deliberate choice to place conscience above career, humanity above hierarchy. Final briefing, she said, gathering them around the helicopter's side hatch. Once we're airborne, there's no turning back. Our primary mission is to locate survivors and provide immediate medical assistance. Secondary objective is to extract as many as possible, prioritizing the critically injured. She unfolded a map of Death Valley across an equipment case. We'll approach from the northeast, using this ridge to mask our radar signature. Landing Zone Alpha is this plateau overlooking the main crash sites. Frank and I will descend to the valley floor while Dan maintains position with Mari at the LZ to receive casualties. What about base response? Dave asked. They'll scramble aircraft once they realize we've gone AWOL. That's why you'll remain with the helicopter to manage communications and electronic countermeasures, Kate explained. Your job is to buy us time, confuse their tracking systems, generate false returns, whatever it takes. They each nodded, understanding their roles. The plan was simple by necessity, with enough flexibility to adapt to whatever conditions they encountered. A noise at the hangar entrance caused them to freeze. A figure stood silhouetted against the dying sunlight, slender, hesitant, clearly not part of the maintenance crew authorized to be there. Dave moved swiftly, positioning himself to intercept the intruder. The figure stepped forward into the light, revealing a young man in a flight suit, Mari's younger brother, Airman First Class Carlos Santos. Carlos, Mari hissed, "What are you doing here?" The young airman straightened, his expression determined despite the nervousness evident in his stance. "I overheard you in the equipment room. I know what you're planning." Kate stepped forward. "Airman Santos, this isn't what it looks like." "It looks like you're launching an unauthorized rescue mission for the downed pilots," he replied, his voice steadier than his posture. "And I want to help." Mari moved to her brother's side. "Carlos, this is career suicide. You've only been in the Air Force for 18 months. "Those are my classmates out there," he insisted. "People I trained with, friends." Kate studied the young man, recognizing the same determination she had seen countless times in new pilots, the untested courage that often made the difference between heroism and tragedy. "What's your specialty, airman?" "Communications and pararescue, ma'am. I'm PJ qualified." Pararescue jumper, one of the most elite and demanding specialties in the Air Force. The Air Force's special operators trained specifically for combat search and rescue. It was an unexpected and potentially valuable skill set. Dan shook his head. "We can't bring him. It's one thing for us to throw our careers away, we've all put in our time, but this kid has his whole future ahead of him." Carlos stood straighter. "With respect, sir, my future is my choice, and I choose to be part of this mission." The determination in his eyes reminded Kate of herself at his age, the absolute certainty that came with youth and conviction. She made her decision. "Gear up, Santos. You'll deploy with Frank and me to the valley floor. Your pararescue training might save lives down there." Mari looked torn between professional approval and sisterly concern. "Kate, he's my little brother." "And he's a trained airman making his own choice," Kate replied gently, "just like we all are." The tension was broken by the sound of the hangar's side door opening. They turned as one, expecting to face security forces or superior officers. Instead, Lieutenant Bobby Taylor's father, Colonel Richard Taylor, retired, stood framed in the doorway. The silver-haired veteran surveyed the scene, his experienced eyes taking in the prepped helicopter and the assembled team with their rescue gear. "Colonel Taylor," Kate acknowledged, stepping forward, "this isn't—" He raised a hand to stop her explanation. "Major Harrison, let's not insult each other's intelligence. I know exactly what this is." He approached, his gait still carrying the precision of decades in uniform. "My son is out there. General Reynolds just briefed the families that rescue operations are on hold for at least 24 hours. Sir, we're—" Again, he cut her off. "You're doing what Bill Harrison would have done, what I would do if I still had wings." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "This is the last known transponder data from my son's F-35. The emergency beacon activated at these coordinates." He handed the paper to Kate, who unfolded it to find precise location data, more specific than what she had been able to gather during her flyover. "How did you get this?" she asked. A tight smile crossed the colonel's weathered face. "I still have friends in the right places. That's all you need to know." Kate studied the coordinates, then passed them to Dave, who immediately entered them into their navigation system. "Thank you, sir." Colonel Taylor looked at each of them in turn, his gaze lingering on the rescue equipment and medical supplies. "I won't ask if you're sure about this. I can see that you are." He extended his hand to Kate. "Bring him home, Major. Bring them all home." She clasped his hand firmly. "We will, sir." As Taylor departed, Kate turned to her team. The sun had almost set, painting the sky in deepening shades of crimson and gold. The moment of decision had arrived. "Final checks. We depart in 5 minutes." They moved with practiced efficiency, each attending to their assigned tasks. Dan and Dave performed the final pre-flight sequence, bringing the Pave Hawk systems online with minimal electronic signature. Frank and Carlos secured the cabin for dust-off, while Mari arranged her medical equipment for immediate access. Kate stepped outside briefly, needing a moment alone before committing to a course that would forever alter their lives. The desert air had cooled with nightfall, carrying the faint scent of sage and jet fuel. Above, the first stars were appearing, navigational beacons that had guided pilots since humans first took to the skies. She reached for the Omega Speedmaster on her wrist, her father's watch, her most treasured possession. In her pocket was a challenge coin, a weighty metal disc emblazoned with her squadron's insignia and their motto, "Upward and Onward." Tradition held that a pilot should flip the coin when faced with an impossible decision. Kate withdrew the coin and held it in her palm, feeling its weight. Then, with a decisive motion, she closed her fingers around it without tossing it. "Some choices you don't leave to chance," she murmured. The hangar door opened behind her. Dan emerged, his expression solemn. "We're ready when you are, Kate." She nodded, pocketing the coin. "Let's bring them home." They boarded the helicopter in silence, each lost in their own thoughts yet united in purpose. Kate took the pilot's seat, with Dan beside her as co-pilot. The others secured themselves in the cabin as the rotors began their rhythmic acceleration from standstill to flying speed. "Viper rescue, pre-flight complete," Dan reported formally, as if this were a sanctioned mission. "Ready for departure." Kate's hands moved across the controls with practiced precision. The Pave Hawk lifted smoothly from the hangar floor, hovering momentarily before she guided it toward the open doors. "Viper rescue departing," she confirmed, feeling a sense of grim determination settle over her. "Rescue mission is a go." As they emerged into the night sky, the lights of Nelly's Air Force Base spread out below them like a reflection of the stars above. Somewhere to the west, beyond the darkened ridges, a storm raged across Death Valley, and within that maelstrom, pilots, colleagues, students, friends, waited for rescue that official channels had deemed too dangerous to attempt. The Pave Hawk banked toward the western horizon, accelerating into the gathering darkness. Behind them, the radio crackled to life. "Unidentified aircraft departing Hangar 6, you are not authorized for takeoff. Return to base immediately. Repeat, return to base immediately." Dave activated their electronic countermeasures, scrambling the tracking systems that would reveal their identity and heading. "That should buy us about 15 minutes before they figure out exactly who we are and where we're going." 15 minutes is all we need to clear their response radius," Kate replied, pushing the helicopter to maximum speed. "After that, it's just us, the storm, and whatever brought down those fighters." The desert landscape blurred beneath them as they raced against time, regulations, and the elements. Ahead, the horizon was obscured by a wall of swirling dust and darkness, the sandstorm that had transformed a routine training exercise into a fight for survival. Kate checked her father's watch one final time before focusing entirely on the mission ahead. The second hand swept smoothly around the dial, marking the passage of moments that would define not just careers, but lives. 3 seconds to decide, 3 hours to prepare. Now they had however long it took to find those pilots and bring them home. The Pave Hawk vanished into the darkness, leaving behind the security of protocol and plunging into the unknown, where regulations ended and courage began. The Pave Hawk thundered through the night sky, vibrating with the strain of maximum speed. Inside the cockpit, Kate gripped the controls with the focused intensity that had defined her career, eyes constantly scanning the instruments as they approached the wall of swirling sand ahead. The desert below had vanished into darkness, the terrain now visible only as ghostly contours on their navigation displays. 5 minutes to storm front, Dan announced, his voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. Base communications dropping out. In the cabin behind them, Dave monitored his electronic warfare systems, fingers dancing across keyboard interfaces. Counter-detection measures holding. They're scrambling two F-16s, but their vector suggests they're searching the wrong quadrant. Kate nodded, adjusting their heading by 2 degrees. The thin margin between pursuit and mission completion was familiar territory for combat pilots, the difference between success and failure often measured in seconds and single-digit course corrections. "Everyone secure for turbulence," she called back to the cabin. "We're going in." The helicopter shuddered as they hit the outer boundary of the sand storm. Fine particles instantly engulfed them, reducing visibility to near zero and transforming the cockpit windows into opaque sheets of swirling brown. The aircraft bucked and yawed as competing air currents battled around them, each gust a hammer blow against the fuselage. "Switching to instrument navigation," Kate announced, engaging the terrain-following radar system. The display illuminated with the complex topography ahead, canyon systems, ridge lines, and the yawning void of Death Valley itself. "Dave, activate your terrain mapping. Cross-reference with the emergency beacon coordinates." "Already on it," came the reply. "Primary beacon still active at Taylor's position. Secondary signals scattered throughout the central corridor. Strongest concentration in the eastern section of the valley." Frank's voice cut in, the former Marine's tone matter-of-fact. "Those beacons are designed to last 72 hours in ideal conditions. Factor in the heat, sand interference, and crash damage, we may be looking at a much shorter window." Kate processed this information silently, mentally calculating survival probabilities against the hostility of the environment. Desert valleys could reach crushing daytime temperatures well over 110 degrees, while dropping precipitously at night. Pilots downed with minimal survival gear would be facing critical challenges: exposure, dehydration, and potentially untreated injuries. "Mari, what's your medical assessment if we assume multiple trauma cases?" she asked. "Without knowing specific injuries, I'm preparing for everything from simple fractures to internal bleeding," the combat medic replied. "The priority will be stabilization and evacuation. We can't treat complex trauma in these conditions." The helicopter continued its descent into the maelstrom, now fully engulfed in the storm that had claimed 14 advanced fighters just hours earlier. The roar of sand particles striking the fuselage created a constant background din, like thousands of tiny projectiles testing the aircraft's integrity. "I'm picking up something," Dan said suddenly, tapping a section of their tactical display. "Intermittent radar return, too organized to be terrain, too small for an aircraft." Kate studied the anomaly, a faint, rhythmic signature appearing briefly before vanishing again. Could be debris from one of the crashes. "Negative," Dave interjected, his voice taut with sudden intensity. "That's a directed signal. Someone's using a survival radio to pulse an electromagnetic return deliberately. They're trying to make themselves visible to radar." "Smart pilot," Kate murmured, already adjusting their course toward the signal. "Knows the emergency beacons might not penetrate the storm effectively." The Pave Hawk banked through the churning darkness, following the intermittent signal like a lighthouse through fog. As they closed distance, Dan activated their forward-looking infrared system, scanning for heat signatures. "FLIR picking up a thermal source," he confirmed. "Consistent with human body temperature. single individual, appears to be sheltering beneath some kind of makeshift structure. Mari moved to the side window, pressing her face against the glass despite the near-zero visibility. How far to landing zone? Too far, Kate decided, studying the terrain map. We'll put down here. That signature is fading. Whoever's generating it is losing power or strength. We can't wait. She began searching for a suitable landing area in the treacherous landscape. The canyon walls rose sharply on either side, limiting their options. Eventually, she identified a relatively flat expanse barely large enough for the helicopter's rotor diameter. "This is going to be tight," Dan warned, eyeing the proximity of rock formations on the tactical display. "Tight is better than impossible," Kate replied, beginning their descent. The Pave Hawk hovered momentarily as Kate assessed the landing zone, with the practiced eye of someone whose life had depended on such judgments countless times before. Sand whipped around them in violent eddies, the downwash from the rotors creating a maelstrom that further reduced visibility. With practiced precision, she eased the aircraft down, feeling through the controls as the skids made contact with solid ground. "Secure for ground operations," she ordered, powering down to idle while maintaining essential systems. "Dave, you're our lifeline. Keep the communication channels open and monitor for any sign that base has tracked us." "Copy that," Dave replied, already configuring his equipment for their ground mission. "I'll maintain electronic countermeasures and keep scanning for additional signals." Frank was already checking his rescue gear, heavy packs containing medical supplies, extraction equipment, and survival necessities. Young Airman Santos followed suit, his pararescue training evident in the efficiency of his movements despite the obvious tension in his face. "Mari, you and Dan hold position here," Kate instructed. "Prepare the cabin for immediate casualty reception. Frank, Santos, and I will locate the survivor and assess the situation." Mari nodded, already arranging her medical equipment along one side of the cabin. "I'll be ready. Just get them here alive." Kate secured her survival vest and checked her sidearm, a standard precaution in any rescue operation, though she hoped it would prove unnecessary. The weight of the pistol against her hip was a reminder of the unpredictability they faced, not just from the environment, but from the mysterious circumstances that had brought down 14 advanced fighters simultaneously. "Communications check," she said, adjusting her helmet mic. "Keep channels open. If anything changes with our status, I want immediate notification." With final preparations complete, Kate led Frank and Santos out through the side hatch and into the full fury of the storm. The impact was immediate and disorienting, howling wind carrying sand that stung exposed skin like thousands of microscopic needles. Visibility extended barely beyond arm's reach, the landscape reduced to vague, looming shapes in the darkness. "Activate guidance systems," Kate ordered, pulling down her protective goggles and switching on the tactical display embedded in the lens. A translucent overlay appeared, projecting a navigational path toward the detected signal. They moved in tight formation, each step carefully placed on terrain that shifted unpredictably beneath their boots. The canyon walls provided some shelter from the direct force of the storm, but also created dangerous wind tunnels that could knock an unprepared rescuer off their feet. "How far?" Frank shouted over the wind's howl. 400 meters, Kate replied, checking the diminishing signal strength. "Signal's getting weaker. Move faster." They quickened their pace, pushing against the resistance of the wind and sand. The darkness seemed to close in around them, their helmet lights creating narrow cones of visibility that revealed little beyond the immediate ground ahead. The storm's roar made verbal communication nearly impossible, forcing them to rely on hand signals and their tactical displays. After 20 minutes of grueling progress, Kate's display indicated they were approaching the source of the radar return. Through the swirling sand, a dark shape gradually materialized, the unmistakable silhouette of an F-35, resting at an unnatural angle against a rock formation. "Contact," she announced, approaching cautiously. The aircraft showed remarkably little exterior damage, suggesting a controlled crash landing rather than a catastrophic failure. The canopy was open, but there was no immediate sign of the pilot. Frank circled to the opposite side, his powerful flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Major, over here." Kate rushed to his position, finding what appeared to be a makeshift shelter constructed from the aircraft's survival kit and what looked like pieces of the internal panels. Huddled within was a figure in a flight suit, barely conscious but still clutching an emergency radio modified to emit the pulse they had detected. Lieutenant Taylor, Kate recognized immediately, kneeling beside him. "Bobby, can you hear me?" The young pilot's eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition. "Major Harrison." His voice was barely audible over the storm, parched and strained. "How? You found me." "Smart move with the radar pulse," she replied, already assessing his condition. His flight suit was torn along one leg, revealing a makeshift pressure bandage soaked through with blood. "What's your status, Lieutenant?" "Legs busted," he managed, grimacing as Frank began a more thorough examination. "Systems went dark, all at once. No warnings, just complete shutdown. Managed to glide her in but caught the landing gear on the rocks." Kate nodded, helping Frank stabilize the injured leg while Santos prepared a collapsible stretcher. "What about the others? Any communication with other pilots?" Taylor shook his head weakly. "Radio dead, saw at least 3 others go down before me. One was close, maybe half a mile north. Tried to reach them but—" He gestured to his injured leg. "Save your strength," Kate instructed, turning to Frank. "Assessment." "Compound fracture of the femur," the former Marine replied grimly. "He's lost blood, showing early signs of hypovolemic shock. Dehydrated too. Needs immediate evac." Santos finished assembling the stretcher. "We need to move him now, ma'am." Kate made a quick decision. "Santos, you and Frank get him back to the helicopter. Mari needs to start treatment immediately." She glanced at her tactical display, noting the coordinates Taylor had mentioned. "I'll check the crash site to the north." Frank frowned. "Solo recon isn't protocol, Major." "Neither is any of this," she replied, already checking her equipment. "Taylor's our priority right now. Get him stabilized. I'll maintain communication and be back within 30 minutes. Before they could object further, she activated her navigation system and input the approximate coordinates. "If I'm not back in 30, come looking. But Lieutenant Taylor doesn't have that kind of time to waste arguing." Frank's expression made it clear he disagreed with the decision, but military discipline prevailed. 30 minutes, Major. Not a second more." They carefully transferred Taylor onto the stretcher, securing him against the violent buffeting of the storm. As they began the arduous journey back to the helicopter, Kate headed in the opposite direction, following her tactical display deeper into the canyon system. The storm's intensity seemed to increase with each passing minute, the sand and wind combining into a physical force that pushed against her with every step. Her training had prepared her for extreme environments, but the combination of near-zero visibility, treacherous terrain, and the knowledge that time was working against them created a unique pressure that few had experienced. "Dave, do you copy?" she called through her communication system. His voice returned, broken and distorted. "Reading you, barely, signal degrading with distance." I'm investigating a secondary crash site. Taylor confirmed at least one other aircraft went down approximately half a mile north of his position. Copy, be advised, tracking unusual interference patterns. The transmission dissolved into static before she could request clarification. Kate checked her equipment, finding the signal strength diminishing rapidly. Whatever had affected the aircraft might also be impacting their communications, a concerning development that added urgency to her mission. She continued forward, relying increasingly on her tactical display as the visibility deteriorated further. The canyon walls towered invisibly on either side, occasionally revealing themselves when particularly strong gusts momentarily cleared the air. The terrain became more challenging, with loose scree and unpredictable drop-offs that forced her to test each step before committing her weight. After 15 minutes of careful progress, her display indicated she was approaching the coordinates where another aircraft might have crashed. She slowed, scanning methodically through her goggles for any sign of wreckage. At first, nothing was visible through the swirling sand. Then, as she rounded a bend in the canyon, her light caught a reflection that didn't match the surrounding rock, the distinctive metallic sheen of aircraft composites. Moving closer, she discovered the scattered remains of what was once an F-22 Raptor, now reduced to fragments spread across 50 yards of canyon floor. Unlike Taylor's relatively intact F-35, this aircraft had suffered catastrophic failure. The main fuselage was split open, with components strewn in a pattern consistent with mid-air breakup rather than crash landing. The canopy lay shattered several yards from the primary wreckage, suggesting the pilot had ejected. Kate searched methodically, following standard crash site assessment protocols. If the pilot had ejected successfully, there should be evidence, parachute remnants, survival equipment, or possibly the pilot themselves seeking shelter. Her search pattern widened, moving in concentric circles away from the main wreckage. Eventually, her light illuminated a splash of color against the canyon wall that didn't match the natural environment. The orange and white pattern of a partially deployed parachute, tangled among jagged rock outcroppings 30 feet above the canyon floor. Kate's heart sank. The positioning suggested the pilot had ejected successfully, but been caught by the canyon wall during descent, a tragically common hazard when ejecting over mountainous terrain. She approached the base of the wall, searching for signs of the pilot. A flash of movement caught her attention, barely perceptible, but definitely human. Adjusting her light, she illuminated a small ledge where a figure in a flight suit lay partially concealed by parachute material. "This is Major Harrison, United States Air Force," she called out, already calculating the climb required to reach the ledge. "Can you hear me?" The figure stirred slightly. Taking this as confirmation of life, Kate began assessing the rock face. The climb wouldn't be technically difficult under normal circumstances, but the howling wind and near-zero visibility transformed it into a significant challenge. She secured her equipment and began ascending, testing each handhold carefully before transferring her weight. The rough stone provided decent grip despite the sand, allowing her to make steady progress toward the ledge. Upon reaching it, she found a female pilot wedged awkwardly against the canyon wall, partially tangled in parachute cords. The woman's helmet visor was cracked, and dark stains, presumably blood, had dried along one side of her face. "Captain," Kate recognized the rank insignia despite the damage to the flight suit. "I'm Major Harrison. We're getting you out of here." The woman's eyes flickered open, disorientation evident in her unfocused gaze. "System failure," she mumbled. "Complete shutdown. Never seen anything." "Save your strength," Kate instructed, already assessing injuries. The captain had a dislocated shoulder and likely a concussion, but no immediately life-threatening wounds visible. The greater danger came from exposure and dehydration after hours in the elements. Kate checked her communications. "This is Kate. I've located a survivor. Captain, F-22 pilot, injured but alive. Position is approximately half a mile north of the first crash site against the western canyon wall." The response came through broken and distorted. "Copy, Frank, returning. Your position." She turned her attention back to the injured pilot. "Help is coming. Let's get you ready for transport." Working methodically, she freed the captain from the tangled parachute cords and positioned her more securely on the ledge. "What's your name, Captain?" "Bennett," the woman managed, wincing as Kate stabilized her injured shoulder. "Sarah Bennett, 58th Tactical." "Good to meet you, Captain Bennett. Wish the circumstances were better." Kate administered a small amount of water from her survival pack, careful to limit the intake of a dehydrated patient. "Can you tell me what happened to your aircraft?" Bennett's eyes seemed to focus more clearly, professional instinct overriding physical distress. "Mid-exercise. All systems functional then. Nothing. Complete electrical failure. No warning, no cascade effect. 1 second flying, next second dead stick." "Multiple aircraft affected the same way," Kate confirmed. "We're still piecing together what happened." "Not mechanical," Bennett insisted, her voice strengthening with conviction. "Something else. Right before shutdown, communications picked up. A signal, structured, artificial. Then everything went dark." This new information heightened Kate's concern. A deliberate signal preceding multiple simultaneous aircraft failures suggested something far more troubling than a technical malfunction or weather interference. Before she could question further, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed up from below. Frank appeared through the swirling sand, equipment already prepared for an extraction. "Taylor's stabilized," he reported, assessing the situation efficiently. "Mari's working on him now. Let's get the captain down from there." Together, they carefully secured Bennett in a rescue harness and lowered her to the canyon floor. The injured pilot remained conscious throughout the procedure, though pain occasionally broke through her disciplined exterior. "What about the others?" Bennett asked as they prepared to move her. "There were 12 of us in the exercise group." "We're working on locating everyone," Kate assured her, though the enormity of the task loomed large in her mind. 14 aircraft down, scattered across miles of canyon in near-impossible search conditions. As they began the journey back to the helicopter, Kate's communication system crackled back to life with sudden clarity. "Kate, this is Dave. Emergency transmission. Return to base immediately." The urgency in his voice cut through the static. "We've been compromised." "Explain," she demanded, already quickening their pace. "Intercepted communications from Nellie's. They've triangulated our position. 2 rescue helicopters inbound from the south, ETA 15 minutes. General Reynolds himself is aboard." Kate and Frank exchanged a glance that communicated volumes without words. Their unauthorized rescue mission had just become significantly more complicated. "Status of our aircraft?" Kate asked, helping Frank navigate the stretcher across particularly difficult terrain. "Fully operational. Dan has already begun pre-flight procedures." "Copy that. We're 10 minutes out. Have Mari prepare for immediate dust-off once we arrive." They pushed harder through the storm, the stretcher making their progress more difficult but no less determined. Captain Bennett remained stoically quiet despite what must have been considerable pain with each jarring step. "They're going to court-martial all of us," Frank noted matter-of-factly, his voice pitched just loud enough for Kate to hear over the howling wind. "Probably," she acknowledged, having second thoughts. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Not even close, just stating facts. As they navigated the complex terrain back toward their landing zone, Kate's mind raced through scenarios and contingencies. General Reynolds arriving personally suggested this had escalated beyond a simple disciplinary issue. Either he was taking their insubordination as a personal affront, or there was something about this situation, the downed aircraft, the mysterious signal Bennett had mentioned, that warranted his direct involvement. When they finally emerged from the canyon passage into the relative clearing where the Pave Hawk waited, the helicopter's engines were already spinning up, rotors turning lazily in pre-flight preparation. Dan stood in the open door, gesturing urgently for them to hurry. "Get her aboard," Kate ordered Frank, already moving toward the cockpit. "Dave, what's our timeline?" "Inbound aircraft now 10 minutes out," he replied, not looking up from his equipment. "They're on a direct intercept course." Inside the cabin, Mari worked efficiently over Lieutenant Taylor, who appeared stabilized though still in serious condition. IV lines ran from bags suspended from the ceiling, and his leg had been properly splinted and secured. "How is he?" Kate asked, pausing momentarily beside the medic. "He'll make it if we get him to a proper medical facility soon," Mari replied, already shifting her attention to Captain Bennett as Frank helped her aboard. "What about the others?" The question hung heavily in the air. 2 rescued, 12 still missing. The math was simple and devastating. Dan appeared beside her, his weathered face grave. "Your call, Kate. We can try to outrun the inbound helicopters, continue the search elsewhere in the valley, or stand down and face the consequences." The weight of command, the burden her father had carried throughout his career, settled fully on her shoulders. Lives hung in the balance, careers would be destroyed, and all of it hinged on her next decision. "How long until Reynolds' helicopters can reach the other crash sites we've identified?" she asked Dave. "Based on their approach vector and the storm conditions, minimum 30 minutes to reach the nearest site, longer for the others scattered throughout the valley." 30 minutes. In the extreme conditions of Death Valley, with injured pilots possibly bleeding out or succumbing to the elements, that time difference could determine who lived and who died. "We're continuing the search," she decided. "Dan, get us airborne. Dave, plot a course to the next nearest emergency beacon. Frank, prep for another ground extraction." "And when Reynolds catches up to us?" Dan asked, though he was already moving toward the cockpit. "We'll deal with that when it happens." Kate secured herself in the pilot's seat, running through abbreviated pre-flight checks. "Right now, there are pilots out there counting on us to find them before time runs out." The Pave Hawk lifted from the canyon floor, sand swirling violently beneath the downwash of its rotors. As they rose above the immediate confines of the canyon walls, Dave provided coordinates for the next beacon signal, approximately 3 miles east, deeper into the valley system. "Direct course would take us straight into the path of the inbound helicopters," Dan noted, studying the tactical display. "Then we go indirect," Kate replied, banking the aircraft sharply to follow the contours of the canyon. "Terrain-hugging approach. Keep us below their radar horizon for as long as possible." The helicopter thundered through the storm-choked passages, its powerful engines straining against the turbulent air currents that threatened to dash them against the canyon walls. Kate flew with instinctive precision, feeling the aircraft's responses through the controls as if it were an extension of her own body. "Signal strength increasing," Dave reported as they approached the coordinates. "Definitely an emergency beacon, standard Air Force pattern." "Any communication from the pilot?" Kate asked. "Negative, just the automated beacon." They crested a ridge and the valley opened before them, revealing a wider section where the walls retreated to form a natural bowl. At the center, barely visible through the swirling sand, lay another downed F-35, its distinctive shape unmistakable despite the storm. "Taking us down," Kate announced, already searching for a suitable landing zone. Unlike the previous site, this area offered more options, with a relatively flat expanse near the crashed fighter. The Pave Hawks settled onto the valley floor, sand immediately enveloping them in a choking cloud as the rotors stirred the environment. Frank was moving before they had fully touched down, equipment ready, Airman Santos close behind him. "Mari, you're with them this time," Kate ordered. "That beacon's been active for hours with no voice communication. Could mean an unconscious pilot." Mari nodded grimly, grabbing her medical pack. "What's our timeline?" "Fast as possible," Kate replied. "Inbound helicopters are closing. Dave will guide you to the exact beacon location." As the rescue team departed into the storm, Kate turned to Dan. "Keep the engines hot. We may need to leave in a hurry." He studied her with the knowing gaze of someone who had seen countless combat situations. "You thinking about what that F-22 pilot said? The signal before everything went dark?" "It's been on my mind," she acknowledged. 14 advanced aircraft don't just fall out of the sky simultaneously without a cause. And you're wondering if that cause might still be active out here." Kate nodded slowly. If this was some kind of electronic attack, there's no guarantee it was a one-time event. Whatever brought down those fighters could potentially affect our helicopter too. "Yet here we are," Dan noted, "flying through the same airspace without issues." "Different systems," Kate reasoned. "The F-22s and F-35s share common avionics architecture, next-generation digital flight controls. Our Pave Hawk uses older, more hardened systems." She paused, considering implications. Almost like whatever hit them was specifically calibrated for fifth-generation fighter technology. Before Dan could respond, Dave's voice cut in urgently from his station. "Kate, we have a problem. The inbound helicopters have changed course. They're heading directly for us now, not following their previous approach vector." "They've spotted us." "Negative. Their communications suggest they're following some kind of signal or tracking data we're not generating." Kate frowned. "What kind of signal?" "Unknown, but they're converging on this exact location with purpose." Dave looked up, his expression troubled behind his glasses, almost like they knew precisely where to find us. A cold realization settled over Kate. Or they knew where to find this crash site all along. The implications cascaded through her mind. If Reynolds and his team had known the exact locations of the downed aircraft before launching their delayed rescue operation, it suggested either negligence in not acting sooner or, more disturbingly, prior knowledge of whatever had caused the crashes in the first place. "How long until they reach us?" she demanded. 7 minutes at their current speed and heading." Kate activated her communications link to the ground team. "Frank, what's your status?" His voice returned, breathless with exertion. "We've reached the aircraft. Pilot located, alive but unconscious. Severe head trauma. Mari stabilizing now. Need about 10 minutes to secure for transport." "You have 5, Kate informed him grimly. "Reynolds is inbound directly to your position. ETA 7 minutes." A burst of static preceded his reply. "Copy that, we'll double time it." Kate turned to Dan. "Power up the active sensors. I want to know the instant those helicopters come within visual range." As he complied, Dave suddenly straightened at his station, attention focused intently on his monitoring equipment. "Kate, I'm picking up that signal Captain Bennett mentioned. Faint but structured, definitely artificial. Source. Triangulating now. It's coming from the ridge line to the northeast, approximately 1 mile from our position. Kate joined him, studying the signal pattern on his display. The waveform pulsed in a distinctly non-random sequence, suggesting intentional transmission rather than natural interference. "That's not one of ours," Dan confirmed, examining the pattern. "Doesn't match any standard military communication protocol I've ever seen." A new possibility formed in Kate's mind, one that connected the mysterious signal, the downed aircraft, and Reynolds' direct approach to this specific crash site. "Dave, can you record that signal? Capture everything about it." "Already doing so," he replied. "But why?" "Because I think we just stumbled into something much bigger than a training accident," she interrupted. "Reynolds isn't coming here just to bust us for insubordination. He's coming because we're getting too close to whatever really happened out here." The implications hung heavily in the air between them. If correct, it suggested a level of complexity and potentially deception that transcended ordinary military mishaps. Before they could pursue this line of thinking further, Frank's voice broke through on the communications channel. "Inbound to your position. Pilot secured. Condition critical but stable. Mari says he'll make it if we get him to a hospital within the hour." "Copy that," Kate acknowledged. "We're ready for immediate dust-off." Minutes later, the ground team emerged from the storm, carrying a stretcher between them. The unconscious pilot, a young captain based on the visible insignia, had been professionally stabilized, though the amount of blood soaking through the bandages suggested serious injuries. "Load up quickly," Kate ordered as they approached the helicopter. "We need to be airborne in 2 minutes." As Mari supervised the transfer of the injured pilot into the cabin, Frank approached Kate with a small metallic object in his hand. "Found this embedded in the F-35's communications array," he said, holding up what appeared to be a sophisticated electronic module no larger than a credit card. "It's not standard equipment for any Air Force aircraft I've ever worked on." Kate examined the device without touching it. Some kind of aftermarket modification. "More like an intrusion," Frank replied grimly. "It was hardwired into the communication system, but designed to look like original equipment. Someone put this there deliberately, and they didn't want it found during routine maintenance." The pieces were beginning to align into a troubling pattern. "Secure it for evidence. We need to." Dave's urgent voice cut her off. "Inbound aircraft, 2 miles and closing fast. 2 Pave Hawks coming in from the southeast." "Everyone aboard now," Kate ordered, already moving to the cockpit. "Secure for immediate departure." Within moments, the team had loaded their equipment and patience, securing everything for rapid takeoff. Kate's hands flew across the controls, bringing the engines to full power as Dan completed the abbreviated pre-flight sequence. "Ready for liftoff," he confirmed. The Pave Hawk rose swiftly from the valley floor, climbing faster than recommended safety parameters as Kate pushed the aircraft to its limits. Sand fell away beneath them as they gained altitude, the storm's fury somewhat diminished at higher elevations. "Which way?" Dan asked, hands poised over the navigation controls. Kate considered their options. With 2 critically injured pilots aboard, continuing the search for others would put lives already saved at risk. Yet abandoning the search meant potentially leaving injured personnel to die in the harsh conditions below. The decision crystallized with sudden clarity. Set course for the signal source Dave detected, 1 mile northeast. Dan raised an eyebrow. "Not back to base." "Not yet. If that signal is what brought down those fighters, we need to know what it is and who's operating it." Reynolds' helicopters are now 1 mile out and have spotted us, Dave reported. They're increasing speed to intercept. Evasive course, Kate instructed, banking the helicopter sharply toward a narrow gap between towering rock formations. Use the terrain to break their line of sight. The Pave Hawk responded instantly to her commands, diving into the canyon system with a maneuverability that belied its size. Behind them, the pursuing helicopters would be forced to either follow their dangerous course or take a longer route around the obstacles. They're falling behind, Dave confirmed after several minutes of intense flying. Signal source now half a mile ahead, bearing 035. As they cleared another ridge line, a new feature appeared on their tactical display. A small structure nestled against the base of a cliff face, nearly invisible against the natural rock formations. That's not on any of our maps, Dan noted, zooming in on the anomaly. Looks like some kind of temporary installation. Kate circled cautiously, maintaining enough distance to avoid detection while studying the site. The structure appeared to be a modular field laboratory, with satellite communication equipment and what looked like a generator system providing power. No military markings, she observed. No standard identification of any kind. Civilian contractors, Dan suggested. In a restricted military training range, without proper identification, Kate shook her head. Not a chance. This is completely off books. Dave's monitoring equipment suddenly spiked. Signal strength increasing dramatically. They've definitely spotted us. As if to confirm his assessment, the satellite dish mounted atop the structure began rotating to track their movement. Simultaneously, their own communications system erupted with static and garbled transmissions. They're actively jamming us, Dave reported, frantically adjusting his equipment. Sophisticated frequency-hopping protocol, military-grade or better. Kate made an instant decision. Take pictures of everything, record all signals. We need evidence of whatever this is. As Dave complied, their tactical display suddenly illuminated with new threats. Reynolds' helicopters have corrected course. They're heading directly toward us again, maximum speed. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. With 2 critically injured pilots aboard and their unauthorized mission already compromised, they were quickly running out of options. One more pass, Kate insisted, bringing the Pave Hawk around for a final observation run over the mysterious installation. As they passed overhead, a figure emerged from the structure, a man in civilian clothing, looking up at them with what appeared to be a communications device in hand. The moment stretched with strange significance, a silent acknowledgement between unknown adversaries. Got everything, Dave confirmed. Full visual documentation and signal recordings. Set course for Nellie's, Kate ordered, banking away from the installation. Maximum speed. We need to get these pilots to medical care. The Pave Hawk thundered eastward, pushing its engines beyond recommended tolerances as they raced back toward the Air Force base. Behind them, Reynolds' helicopters continued their pursuit, steadily closing the distance with each passing minute. They'll intercept us before we reach Nellie's, Dan calculated grimly. No way around it. Kate nodded, having already reached the same conclusion. We're not trying to escape them, not anymore. He glanced at her, understanding dawning in his expression. You want them to catch us. I want Reynolds to explain why he delayed rescue operations when he knew exactly where those pilots were, she confirmed. And I want him to explain that installation and its connection to 14 downed aircraft. In the cabin behind them, Mari continued tending to the injured pilots, her focus absolute despite the aircraft's aggressive maneuvering. Frank secured the mysterious electronic device they had recovered, while Airman Santos assisted with keeping the patient stable during the turbulent flight. Pursuing helicopters now within visual range, Dave reported. They're ordering us to reduce speed and prepare for escort. Kate activated the communication channel. This is Major Catherine Harrison. We have 3 critically injured pilots aboard requiring immediate medical attention. Request priority clearance to Nellie's medical facilities. The response came immediately, General Reynolds' voice unmistakable despite the electronic distortion. Major Harrison, you are ordered to land immediately at coordinates being transmitted to you. Medical personnel are standing by. Comply immediately or face additional charges. The coordinates appeared on their navigation display, a location still within the training range, but away from the mysterious installation they had discovered. He's trying to control the situation, Dan observed quietly. Keep us contained until he figures out how much we know. Kate considered their increasingly limited options. With injured pilots aboard whose lives depended on prompt medical care, she couldn't justify continuing to evade Reynolds' forces. Yet landing at his designated coordinates, rather than proceeding directly to Nellie's, felt like surrendering control of not just their fate, but potentially evidence of whatever had really occurred in Death Valley. Captain Bennett stirred in the cabin, her voice weak but determined as she addressed Kate. Major, those coordinates, not random. Kate glanced back, surprised by the injured pilot's intervention. What do you mean, Captain? That location, Bennett managed, grimacing through obvious pain. It's where my squadron commander's F-22 went down. I saw it before my systems failed. The significance wasn't lost on Kate. Reynolds wasn't just directing them to a convenient landing zone. He was steering them toward another crash site, one potentially connected to whatever they had just discovered. Change of plans, she announced. Dave, transmit everything we've recorded, the signal pattern, the installation photos, everything, to your secure server at Nellie's. Encrypt it with your personal authentication. He complied immediately, fingers flying across his keyboard. Transmission initiated. Completion in 40 seconds. Kate activated the communication channel again. General Reynolds, we are complying with your order. Be advised we have 3 critical patients aboard requiring immediate medical evacuation. Medical teams are standing by, Major, came the terse reply. Just set your aircraft down. The Pave Hawk began its descent toward the designated coordinates, the pursuing helicopters maintaining close formation on either side. Through the swirling sand, Kate could make out the distinctive shape of another crashed fighter, an F-22 Raptor, largely intact but resting at an unnatural angle against the valley floor. Transmission complete, Dave confirmed quietly. Data secure. Kate nodded, making eye contact with each member of her crew. No words were necessary. They all understood what was at stake and what might follow. They had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, discovered things perhaps not meant to be found, and now would face the consequences together. The Pave Hawk touched down approximately 50 yards from the downed F-22, sand billowing around them as the rotor slowed. Through the settling dust, Kate could see Reynolds' helicopters landing nearby, their doors already opening to deploy security forces in full tactical gear. Everyone stay calm, she instructed her team. Our priority remains the injured pilots. Whatever happens next, remember why we came out here. As she powered down the aircraft, a squad of armed security forces surrounded their helicopter, weapons not quite pointed at them, but positioned for immediate response if necessary. Behind them strode General Reynolds himself, his weathered face set in a rigid mask of authority as he approached their aircraft. Kate opened the side hatch and stepped out to meet him, standing at attention despite the circumstances. The general stopped several paces away, his gaze moving from Kate to the helicopter behind her, where the injured pilots were visible through the open door. "Major Harrison," he acknowledged, his voice carrying the weight of decades of command. "You have violated direct orders, misappropriated military equipment, and endangered yourself and your team in an unauthorized operation." "Yes, sir," she replied evenly. "We also rescued 3 pilots who would likely have died waiting for the official response. Pilots whose exact crash locations you apparently knew before we even departed." A flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, or confirmation, crossed Reynolds' face before his expression hardened again. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into, Major." "I think I have some idea, sir." She met his gaze directly. "We found an unidentified installation transmitting signals consistent with what Captain Bennett described experiencing before her aircraft failed. We also recovered an unauthorized electronic device integrated into one of the downed F-35's communication systems." For a moment, genuine alarm registered in the general's eyes before he mastered it. "That information is classified beyond your clearance level, Major." "Classified information that resulted in 14 aircraft crashing and pilots nearly dying." She maintained her composure despite the building tension. "With respect, sir, what exactly is happening here?" Reynolds glanced at the security forces, then back to Kate. His voice dropped, becoming almost conciliatory. "You've always been like your father, Harrison. Too smart for your own good, too dedicated to your people to follow orders that don't make sense." "My father would have done exactly what I did," she replied. "He wouldn't have left those pilots to die." "No, he wouldn't have." A brief expression of something like regret crossed the general's face. "And that's why I need you to stand down now, before this gets worse for everyone involved." Before Kate could respond, Mari appeared at the helicopter door. "Sir, these pilots need immediate medical evacuation. They won't survive much longer in these conditions." Reynolds nodded sharply, gesturing to the medical personnel waiting nearby. "Get them aboard the medevac helicopter. Priority transport to Nellie's medical." As the medical team rushed forward, Kate watched them with mixed emotions. They had accomplished their primary mission, rescuing pilots who might otherwise have died, but at what cost? And what exactly had they uncovered in the process? "Your team will return with me for immediate debriefing," Reynolds informed her, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "Security will escort you." As armed personnel surrounded them, Kate exchanged glances with her crew. They had known the risks when they launched this mission, understood the potential consequences of defying direct orders. What they hadn't anticipated was stumbling upon what appeared to be a classified operation potentially responsible for downing 14 advanced aircraft. "What about the other pilots still out there?" she asked as they were led toward Reynolds' helicopter. "Search and rescue teams are deploying to all crash sites now," the general replied. "The mission you started will be completed, Major, just not by you." As they boarded the general's helicopter, Kate took one final look at the valley stretching away into the storm-shrouded distance. Somewhere out there, pilots were still waiting for rescue, and an unexplained installation was transmitting signals that had somehow brought down the Air Force's most advanced fighters. Whatever they had stumbled into, she suspected this was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would test not just her career, but her understanding of the institution she had dedicated her life to serving. The helicopter lifted off, carrying them back toward Nellie's and whatever consequences awaited. Behind them, the storm continued to rage across Death Valley, obscuring secrets buried in its depths. secrets that, despite everything, Kate was now determined to uncover. Dan leaned close as they gained altitude, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. Dave's transmission went through. Whatever happens next, the evidence is secure. Kate nodded almost imperceptibly. It wasn't much, but it was something. A record of what they had found, protected against whatever efforts might be made to erase it. A starting point for whatever came next. As Reynolds' base grew visible on the horizon, she touched the watch on her wrist, her father's watch, the one that had witnessed his final mission and now hers. Whatever happened in the hours and days ahead, she had stayed true to the principles he had taught her. Sometimes, the right thing and the ordered thing were different paths entirely. The helicopter began its descent toward Nellie's, where security forces and senior officers would be waiting to begin the formal process of holding them accountable for their actions. But as Kate surveyed her team, Dan's steady presence, Frank's resolute strength, Mari's unwavering compassion, Dave's quiet determination, and young Santos's newfound courage, she knew they had already been judged by the standard that mattered most. They had not left their people behind. Whatever the cost, that was a reckoning they could face with heads held high. The helicopter touched down on the tarmac, its rotors slowing as armed security personnel approached to escort them inside. This phase of their journey was ending, but Kate sensed that a more complex and dangerous path was just beginning. Whatever truth lay behind the downed fighters and the mysterious installation, someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep it hidden. The question now was whether they had discovered enough to bring that truth to light, or simply enough to put themselves in danger. As they stepped onto the tarmac, Reynolds placed a hand on Kate's shoulder, holding her back momentarily as the others were led away. His voice was low, meant for her ears alone. "Your father made the same choice once," he said, something unreadable in his eyes. "Choosing his pilots over his orders, it cost him everything." "But he saved those men," Kate replied steadily, "including Richard Taylor." Reynolds studied her for a long moment. "Some sacrifices seem worth it in the moment. It's only later you understand the full price." Before she could respond, he gestured for the security team to continue. As Kate was led away, Reynolds remained standing on the tarmac, a solitary figure framed against the distant storm still visible on the horizon. Whatever game the general was playing, Kate was now certain of one thing. This was about far more than insubordination or unauthorized rescue operations. They had stumbled upon something significant enough to bring a major general personally into the field, something connected to advanced technology capable of disabling the nation's most sophisticated fighter aircraft. And somehow, her father's final mission decades ago seemed to be casting a shadow over these events, a connection she couldn't yet see but could feel with growing certainty. As they entered the base's secure section, doors closing behind them with ominous finality, Kate made a silent promise to the injured pilots they had rescued, and those still awaiting help in the storm-ravaged valley beyond. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The interrogation room at Nellie's Air Force Base had all the warmth of a surgical theater. Bare walls painted institutional gray, a metal table bolted to the floor, and cameras watching silently from the corners. Kate sat alone, still in her flight suit, her father's watch ticking steadily on her wrist as she had for the past 3 hours. No charges had been formally presented. No official debriefing had begun. Just silence and isolation, psychological tactics she recognized from her training on resistance techniques. They were letting her sit with the weight of her actions, allowing doubt and fatigue to erode her resolve before questioning began. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, she used the time to organize her thoughts, mentally cataloging everything they had discovered in Death Valley. The synchronized failure of 14 advanced aircraft, Captain Bennett's account of an artificial signal preceding the shutdowns, the unauthorized electronic device found in the F-35's communications array, and most significantly, the unmarked installation transmitting the mysterious signal pattern. The door finally opened, admitting two Air Force security officers followed by a man in a dark suit whose bearing screamed intelligence service. He carried a thin folder and wore no identification. "Major Harrison," the man acknowledged, taking a seat across from her. He didn't offer his name. "Quite a day you've had." Kate remained silent, studying him with the same analytical focus she applied to enemy aircraft. "Your rescue operation saved 3 lives," he continued, opening the folder. "Lieutenant Taylor is in recovery following surgery. Captain Bennett's shoulder has been set, and the third pilot, Captain Rodriguez, remains in intensive care but is expected to survive." He glanced up. "The remaining 11 pilots have all been recovered, 9 alive, 2 deceased." A complex mixture of emotions washed through her. Relief that most had survived, grief for those lost, and the nagging certainty that had they been allowed to launch the rescue mission immediately, all might have been saved. "Where is my team?" she asked, her voice steady despite hours without water. "Being debriefed separately." The man steepled his fingers. "Which brings us to the matter at hand. Your unauthorized mission has complicated a highly sensitive situation." "A situation that involved bringing down 14 advanced fighters and endangering the lives of their pilots," Kate replied evenly. The man's expression remained neutral. "What exactly do you think you discovered out there, Major?" "An unmarked installation in a restricted military training area, transmitting signals that preceded the simultaneous system failure of every fifth-generation fighter in the exercise. Plus, an unauthorized electronic device integrated into at least one aircraft's communications system." She leaned forward slightly. "What I don't know is whether this was an exercise parameter that went catastrophically wrong or something else entirely." The man studied her for several long moments. "Your father had a similar talent for seeing patterns others missed." The mention of her father wasn't accidental. They were probing for an emotional reaction. "My concern is for the pilots who nearly died out there," she replied. "As is ours." He closed the folder. "Which is why General Reynolds has recommended you and your team be placed under house arrest pending a full investigation." "House arrest rather than the brig?" Kate raised an eyebrow. "That's unusually lenient for multiple violations of direct orders and misappropriation of military equipment." "The General recognizes that your actions, while unauthorized, came from a place of duty to your fellow officers." The man stood. "You'll be escorted to quarters and confined there until further notice. Your team has received similar arrangements." As if on cue, the security officers stepped forward. "One more thing, Major," the man added as she rose. "The events in Death Valley, including what you may have seen or recorded, are classified at the highest level. Discussing them with anyone not explicitly cleared will constitute a federal offense, including with other members of your team." They were being isolated not just physically, but informationally, prevented from comparing notes or forming a coherent narrative of what they had witnessed. Standard procedure when containing a potential intelligence breach. "I understand classification requirements," she replied. Then, holding his gaze deliberately, "Does General Reynolds have authorization to run electronic warfare testing on unwitting pilots during training exercises?" A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, crossed his face before his professional mask returned. "Good day, Major." The security detail escorted her through the base to the officers' quarters, where a guard was already stationed outside her door. Inside, she found the room had been thoroughly searched. Her personal computer was gone, her phone missing, all potential communication channels severed. Through the window, she could see similar guards positioned outside several other quarters, presumably where Dan, Frank, Mari, and Dave were being held. There was no sign of Airman Santos, the youngest and most vulnerable member of their impromptu team. Kate sat on the edge of her bed, fatigue finally washing over her now that she was alone. They had been flying and conducting rescue operations for nearly 18 hours straight, pushing their bodies and aircraft to the limits. But physical exhaustion was secondary to the mental strain of trying to piece together the puzzle they had stumbled upon. Whatever had happened in Death Valley wasn't a simple training accident. The unmarked installation, the deliberate signal that preceded the aircraft failures, Reynolds' personal involvement, and now this level of containment and classification, it all pointed to something far more complex and potentially disturbing. She removed her father's watch, turning it over to read the inscription on the back. 3 seconds to decide. A lifetime to live with it. Colonel William Harrison's personal motto, a reminder of how quickly critical decisions must be made in combat and how enduring their consequences could be. Her father had made a similar choice decades ago, choosing to save his fellow pilots rather than follow orders. According to Reynolds, it had cost him everything. Yet he had saved lives, including Richard Taylor's, a decision that had now circled back through time as she rescued Taylor's son from the same desert. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The door opened to reveal a young lieutenant with medical insignia. Major Harrison, I'm here to check your condition following extended exposure to extreme environments. The medical examination was brief but thorough. Vital signs, pupil response, hydration assessment. As the lieutenant packed his equipment, he slipped something into her hand while maintaining eye contact, a silent message passing between them. After he departed, Kate examined the object, a small folded note. Opening it carefully, she found a message in tight, controlled handwriting. Not all agree with containment protocol. Dave's transmission received and secured. Taylor family aware of situation. Stand by. A cold wave of relief washed through her. Dave's data transmission, containing the evidence they had gathered about the mysterious installation and signal, had made it through before they were detained. And someone, perhaps multiple someones, within the base structure disagreed with how the situation was being handled. Most significantly, the Taylor family was aware of the situation. Colonel Richard Taylor, retired but still connected, had been instrumental in their mission, and now appeared to be working from the outside while they were contained within. She destroyed the note immediately, flushing the tiny pieces down the toilet. Then she lay on her bed, allowing her body the rest it desperately needed while her mind continued processing possibilities. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by vivid dreams of storm-swept canyons and falling aircraft. In one particularly jarring sequence, her father's F-16 plummeted alongside Taylor's son's F-35, both spiraling toward the same patch of desert floor 30 years apart. She woke suddenly to the sound of her door being unlocked. The room was dark, base lights filtering through the blinds casting striped shadows across the floor. A figure entered silently, the distinctive silhouette of General Reynolds himself. "Major Harrison," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Kate sat up, instantly alert despite the disorientation of interrupted sleep. "Yes, sir." Reynolds closed the door and remained standing, his weathered face grave in the dim light. "I'm breaking protocol by being here. What I'm about to tell you isn't authorized." She remained silent, waiting. "Your father didn't die the way you were told," he said finally. The words hit with physical force, reopening a wound she had thought long healed. "Sir." The official record states he diverted anti-aircraft fire from a damaged transport during Desert Storm. That's partially true. Reynolds' voice dropped lower. What isn't in the record is that the transport was damaged by friendly fire from an experimental electronic warfare system being field tested without proper authorization. Kate felt the room tilt slightly, her father's watch suddenly heavier where it lay on the bedside table. Who authorized the test? That's the point, Major. Nobody did, at least nobody with proper authority. It was a black project run by defense contractors working through unofficial channels in the Pentagon. When your father discovered what had happened, he threatened to go public. Reynolds paused. 3 days later, he was dead in a mission that was supposed to be routine. You're saying he was deliberately? I'm not saying anything definitive, Reynolds cut her off. But the coincidence was too significant to ignore. Your father was a man of principle like you. He couldn't let fellow pilots be endangered by unauthorized experimentation. And now the same thing is happening again, Kate said, the parallels crystallizing with terrible clarity. Reynolds nodded slowly. What you found in Death Valley is part of a program called Blackout, a next-generation electronic warfare system designed to remotely disable enemy aircraft by exploiting vulnerabilities in advanced avionics. It's being developed by a private defense contractor under Pentagon oversight, but the test conducted during Red Flag wasn't fully authorized. Those pilots weren't informed they were test subjects, Kate stated, anger beginning to simmer beneath her professional exterior. Most senior officers weren't informed either, Reynolds confirmed, including me initially. I was told to delay rescue operations for assessment purposes. Only after you were already airborne did I receive intelligence about what had actually occurred. So you came personally to contain the situation. To prevent another cover-up, he corrected. I've spent 30 years wondering if I could have done more when your father died. I won't make the same mistake twice. Kate studied the general, reassessing everything she thought she knew about him. Why tell me this now? Because in approximately 4 hours, the contractors behind Blackout will have removed all evidence from the Death Valley installation. The electronic device you recovered has already been confiscated, and your team is scheduled for transfer to separate bases tomorrow morning, a classic dispersal tactic to isolate witnesses. Reynolds met her gaze directly. Unless someone stops it. The implication was clear. Reynolds wasn't just sharing information, he was suggesting action. What exactly are you proposing, General? Plausible deniability, Major. I'm not proposing anything. He moved toward the door, then paused. But if someone were to ensure that evidence of unauthorized testing on unwitting pilots became public, certain parties at the Pentagon would be forced to conduct a legitimate investigation rather than a cover-up. And my team, currently under house arrest but not formally charged, the MPs on duty will rotate shifts at 200. The replacement team might be delayed due to administrative confusion. Reynolds' expression remained neutral. Dave's equipment has been secured in evidence locker B14. The code changes weekly. This week it happens to be 4291. He opened the door, then looked back at her. Your father would be proud of the officer you've become, Catherine, whatever happens next. With that, he was gone, leaving Kate alone with revelations that transformed everything she understood about her father's death and the events of the past 24 hours. She didn't waste time processing the emotional impact. There would be time for that later. Instead, she moved with tactical precision, changing into the casual clothes stored in her quarters and preparing for what came next. At precisely 1:57, Kate heard a commotion outside, raised voices, followed by the sound of boots moving quickly away from her door. Reynolds had created a diversion as promised. She waited until the corridor fell silent, then carefully tested her door. It opened. The hallway was empty. Moving with the silent efficiency that had made her an exceptional pilot, Kate navigated through the darkened building, avoiding the main corridors and security checkpoints. Her destination was clear: Evidence Locker B14, where Dave's equipment was being held. The administration section was minimally staffed at this hour. She encountered no one as she located the evidence room and entered the code Reynolds had provided, 4291. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Inside, she quickly located Dave's equipment, his specialized laptop and external drives containing the data they had gathered in Death Valley. The transmission he had sent before their capture had apparently reached its destination, but having the original evidence would provide critical backup. As she secured the equipment in a small backpack, the door opened behind her. Kate spun, prepared for confrontation, only to find Dan standing in the doorway. "Figured I'd find you here," he said quietly, his weathered face showing neither surprise nor disapproval. "Reynolds visited me too." "Dave, the others?" she asked. "Already moving. Mari's securing transportation. Frank and Dave are gathering additional evidence from the medical bay where they treated the injured pilots." Dan glanced down the hallway. "We have maybe 10 minutes before security realizes something's happening." Together they moved swiftly through the base, using Dan's decades of experience to avoid detection. Near the maintenance hangars, they rendezvoused with the rest of the team. Dave looked pale but determined as he took his equipment from Kate. "Reynolds told me what happened to your father," he said quietly. "History isn't going to repeat itself. Not tonight." Mari approached from the direction of the motor pool. "I've got us a vehicle, civilian plates. It's parked outside the east perimeter fence where the sensor array is down for maintenance." "What about Santos?" Kate asked, noticing the young airman's absence. "Already moved to safety," Frank assured her. "Taylor's father arranged it. The kid's with his family now." The mention of Colonel Taylor confirmed what Reynolds had implied. There were others working to expose whatever had happened in Death Valley. "Dave, what exactly did you transmit before they took us in?" Kate asked as they moved toward the east fence. "Everything we recorded about the installation plus the signal patterns. I sent it to multiple secure locations, including one belonging to Colonel Taylor." Dave patted his recovered equipment. "But the device Frank found in the F-35, that's the smoking gun. We need physical evidence." "They've confiscated it," Kate informed him. Frank shook his head, a grim smile forming. "Not exactly." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in protective cloth. "I pulled a switch before they took us in, gave them a similar-looking component from standard communications equipment. This is the real device." The revelation sent a surge of hope through the group. With both digital records and physical evidence, they might actually succeed in exposing the unauthorized testing that had endangered so many lives. They reached the perimeter fence without incident, finding the section without active sensors just as Mari had described. A nondescript sedan waited beyond, keys already in the ignition. "Where to?" Dan asked as they settled into the vehicle. "Las Vegas," Dave replied without hesitation. "I have a contact at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. They specialize in digital rights and government oversight. They can help us authenticate the evidence and release it through proper channels." Kate nodded her agreement. In the distance, alarms began to sound on the base. Their absence had been discovered. "Let's move." The desert night enveloped them as they drove away from Nellie's. the base's lights receding in the rearview mirror. Ahead lay uncertainty and risk, but also the possibility of justice, both for the pilots endangered by blackout and perhaps, finally, for her father. The drive to Las Vegas took less than an hour, the city's glow growing on the horizon like an earthbound constellation. They maintained radio silence, aware that Air Force security would be monitoring all frequencies. Despite the lack of verbal communication, a palpable sense of resolve united them. 5 individuals from different backgrounds, bound by service and now by a shared mission to expose a dangerous truth. Dave directed them to an unassuming office building in the city's tech district, far from the famous strip with its casinos and tourists. At this pre-dawn hour, the streets were nearly empty, giving them a clear view of any potential pursuit. "My contact will meet us inside," Dave said as they parked in the underground garage. "She's expecting us." The building's security was minimal. A single night guard who barely glanced at the identification Dave presented. They took the elevator to the 12th floor, where the doors opened to reveal a modern office space with the F logo displayed prominently on the wall. A woman waited for them, her expression serious beneath cropped silver hair. "David," she greeted Dave by his real name. "When you said it was urgent, I didn't expect a full military contingent." "Dr. Margaret Foster, meet Major Catherine Harrison and the rest of my team," Dave replied. "We have evidence of unauthorized military testing that resulted in multiple aircraft crashes and endangered the lives of over a dozen pilots." Dr. Foster's demeanor shifted instantly from cautious to focused. "Show me." For the next hour, they presented everything they had gathered. Dave's recordings of the signal pattern, photographs of the unmarked installation, and most critically, the unauthorized electronic device Frank had recovered from the F-35. "This is a sophisticated signal interceptor and override module," Dr. Foster confirmed, examining the device under a digital microscope connected to her computer. "Military-grade hardware, but not standard issue. The architecture suggests it was designed to integrate with and potentially control 5th-generation fighter avionics systems." "Can you prove it was installed without proper authorization?" Kate asked. Dr. Foster nodded. "Every component authorized for military aircraft has a specific procurement code and installation record. This device has neither." She looked up from her examination. "What you've brought me is definitive evidence of an unauthorized modification to military aircraft that directly endangered pilots." "We need to make this public," Dan stated, "but in a way that can't be buried or discredited." "I have contacts at major news outlets who specialize in military accountability reporting," Dr. Foster replied. "But more importantly, I have connections with the Armed Services Committee in Congress. This level of unauthorized testing on unwitting military personnel will trigger immediate oversight hearings." Frank crossed his massive arms. "Meanwhile, the Air Force is hunting us down as AWOL and potentially facing espionage charges for removing classified material from the base." "Which is why we need to move quickly," Kate agreed. "Dr. Foster, how soon can you verify and distribute this evidence?" "The technical verification I can complete within hours. Distribution through proper channels, ensuring it reaches both media and congressional oversight simultaneously, will take until this afternoon." She studied them thoughtfully. "You realize that even if this succeeds, your military careers are likely over." The team exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. They had known the potential consequences from the moment they took off in the Pave Hawk against orders. "Some things matter more than careers," Mari said quietly. "Like making sure no more pilots die, Because someone wanted to test a new weapons system without proper safety protocols, Dan added. Kate nodded, feeling a deep certainty that they were on the right path. We'll need a secure location to wait until the evidence is released. Once it's public, we can surrender to military authorities with some assurance the truth won't be buried. I have a private residence in Henderson, Dr. Foster offered. No connection to me in any public records. You can remain there until everything is in motion. As the others finalized arrangements with Dr. Foster, Kate stepped away to the window, gazing out at the Las Vegas skyline as dawn began to lighten the eastern horizon. Her father's watch felt heavy on her wrist, its steady ticking a reminder of his presence even now, decades after his death. Had he stood at a similar crossroads 30 years ago, faced with evidence of wrongdoing that had endangered his fellow pilots, had he experienced the same certainty she felt now? Reynolds had said her father threatened to go public before his final mission. Perhaps, in some way, she was completing what he had started. Kate, Dan joined her at the window, his voice low. Dave just intercepted Air Force communications. They've figured out where we are. Security forces are en route. ETA 20 minutes. The news should have triggered alarm, but instead, Kate felt an odd calm settle over her. Do we have time to move the evidence? Dr. Foster is backing everything up now. Multiple secure servers, encrypted distribution protocols set to activate automatically even if we're taken into custody. Then we've done what we needed to do. Kate turned to face the room where the others were now watching her. We have two options. We can try to evade capture, remaining fugitive until the evidence is public, or we can stay and face whatever comes next. If we run, it undermines our credibility, Mari pointed out. Makes us look guilty of something more than just trying to expose the truth. Frank nodded in agreement. I say we stay, face them directly. We haven't done anything wrong except break some regulations to save lives and expose unauthorized testing. Dave, who had been monitoring communications, looked up from his equipment. Multiple vehicles approaching. Standard Air Force security protocol would be to secure the building exits first, then move inward floor by floor. Then we meet them on our terms, Kate decided. Main lobby, all of us together, no resistance. Dr. Foster, are you comfortable being seen with us? The older woman straightened, a spark of defiance in her eyes. I've spent 30 years fighting government overreach and classification abuse. This isn't my first confrontation with authorities, Major Harrison. They gathered their essential materials, the verified evidence now secured in multiple digital locations, and took the elevator to the ground floor. The building's lobby was still empty except for the night security guard, who watched with confusion as they arranged themselves in clear view of the entrance. Through the glass doors, they could see vehicles with government plates pulling up outside. Men in Air Force security uniforms emerged, moving with practiced efficiency to secure the perimeter. Whatever happens next, Kate said to her team, remember why we're here. This isn't about us. It's about making sure no other pilots face what happened in Death Valley without proper protocols and informed consent. The doors opened, and a familiar figure strode in ahead of the security detail, General Reynolds himself, his uniform impeccable despite the early hour. His expression revealed nothing as he approached. Major Harrison, he acknowledged, then glanced at the others. I see you've assembled your full team. Yes, sir, Kate replied evenly. We're prepared to return to base and face any charges resulting from our actions. Reynolds studied them for a long moment, his gaze eventually settling on Dr. Foster. Dr. Margaret Foster, your reputation precedes you. As does yours, General, she replied coolly. I should inform you that evidence of the unauthorized blackout testing has been secured and will be distributed to appropriate oversight authorities regardless of what happens here. A flicker of what might have been approval crossed Reynolds' face before his professional mask returned. Major Harrison and her team are being taken into custody for violating direct orders, unauthorized removal of military equipment, and absence without leave. They will be returned to Nelly's Air Force Base immediately for processing. As security officers moved forward to escort them out, Reynolds stepped closer to Kate, his voice dropping so only she could hear. Your father would be proud. The Armed Services Committee has already been notified. Hearings will begin next week. She met his gaze, understanding flowing between them. Reynolds had been playing a complex game, officially pursuing them while covertly ensuring their evidence reached the right people. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Major. There will still be consequences for your actions, even if the larger truth comes to light. He straightened. But some prices are worth paying. They were led outside to waiting vehicles, the first rays of sunrise breaking over the eastern mountains and catching on the glass facades of the Las Vegas skyline. As Kate was directed into one of the cars, she caught a final glimpse of Dr. Foster standing resolute in the lobby, already on her phone, setting in motion the exposure of a truth long buried. The journey back to Nellie's passed in silence, each member of the team lost in their own thoughts. For Kate, the predominant feeling wasn't fear or regret, but a profound sense of completion, as if a circle that began with her father's death 30 years ago was finally closing. Upon arrival at the base, they were separated and escorted to individual holding cells in the security section, a more serious confinement than their previous house arrest, reflecting the escalation of their actions. Kate surrendered her personal effects, including her father's watch, which the processing officer placed in a clear plastic bag with surprising gentleness. Colonel Harrison's daughter, he said quietly as he logged the item. My father served with him, said he was one of the finest officers he ever knew. Kate nodded, unexpected emotion tightening her throat. Thank you. The cell was Spartan but not punitive. A bunk, a small desk, and a basic bathroom facility. She sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing fatigue to overtake her now that their mission was complete. Whatever happened next was beyond her control. The evidence was secure, the truth would emerge, and the pilots who had been unwitting test subjects would finally know what had really happened in Death Valley. She must have dozed off because the sound of her cell door opening startled her awake. Light streaming through the high window suggested several hours had passed. A young lieutenant stood in the doorway. Major Harrison, your presence is requested in the base commander's office immediately. The base commander was a full colonel named James Patterson, a no-nonsense career officer with a reputation for strict adherence to protocol. His office reflected his personality, meticulously organized, with military commendations displayed in perfect alignment on one wall. Kate was surprised to find not only Colonel Patterson waiting, but also General Reynolds and another man she didn't recognize, a civilian in an expensive suit who carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of high-level Pentagon. Major Harrison, Colonel Patterson began formally, I've been instructed to inform you that the situation has evolved since your return to base. The civilian stepped forward. Major, I'm Deputy Secretary William Bradford from the Department of Defense. 2 hours ago, information regarding Project Blackout was released to select members of Congress and verified by multiple sources within the Pentagon. Kate kept her expression neutral despite the surge of relief. Dr. Foster had worked faster than expected. As a result, Bradford continued, The Secretary of Defense has ordered an immediate investigation into the authorization chain for the testing conducted during Red Flag. Preliminary findings indicate several critical safety protocols were circumvented, and proper notifications were not issued to participating pilots. The pilots weren't informed they were test subjects, Kate stated, unable to keep the edge from her voice. No, they were not, Bradford acknowledged, which represents a serious breach of military testing protocols and potentially federal law. Colonel Patterson cleared his throat uncomfortably. In light of these developments, the charges against you and your team are being reevaluated. Reevaluated? Kate asked. General Reynolds stepped forward. What the colonel means, Major, is that while you still violated direct orders and misappropriated military equipment, the context of those actions has changed significantly. Instead of potentially facing court-martial, you and your team are being placed on administrative leave pending a full review. Bradford nodded. The Secretary believes that the unauthorized nature of the blackout test and the danger it posed to Air Force personnel creates significant mitigating circumstances regarding your actions. Kate absorbed this information, recognizing the political calculation behind it. With blackout now exposed, the Pentagon was shifting to damage control, and punishing the officers who had exposed the program would only worsen the public relations disaster. What about the contractors responsible for the installation in Death Valley? She asked. Their facility has been secured by military police, Reynolds replied, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. All personnel are being questioned, and all equipment has been confiscated as evidence. And the device planted in the F-35's communications array. Bradford's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. We're aware that evidence regarding an unauthorized modification to military aircraft has been secured by Dr. Margaret Foster of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. The Pentagon has requested access to examine this device as part of our investigation. So they knew exactly what had happened, but were maintaining the fiction that the official investigation had proceeded independently of the evidence she and her team had secured. It was bureaucratic theater, but if it meant the truth would come to light, Kate was willing to play along. What happens now? She asked. You and your team will remain at Nellie's but with full base privileges restored, Colonel Patterson informed her. No communication with the media is permitted while the investigation proceeds. In approximately 1 week, you will all be called to testify before a closed-door session of the Armed Services Committee in Washington. And after that, Reynolds and Bradford exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. That will depend on the committee's findings and recommendations, Bradford replied carefully. But I can tell you that the Secretary recognizes the complicated ethical position you were placed in. Your actions saved lives that might otherwise have been lost, and you exposed a serious breach of testing protocols. However, Reynolds added, his tone making it clear this came from higher authorities, the manner in which you chose to act created significant security concerns. There will be consequences, Major Harrison. They simply may not be as severe as initially anticipated. It was as close to vindication as she could expect, acknowledgement that their actions had been justified if not their methods. For now, it would have to be enough. I understand, she said. May I see my team? They're being released from holding now, Colonel Patterson confirmed. You're all restricted to base, but otherwise free to resume normal activities. As the meeting concluded and Kate prepared to leave, Reynolds held her back momentarily. There's one more thing, Major, a personal matter. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, her father's watch, which had been confiscated during processing. I thought you might want this back immediately." As she took the watch, he added quietly, "The investigation into Blackout will inevitably lead to questions about previous testing programs, including the one operating during your father's final mission. After 30 years, that truth might finally come to light as well." Kate slipped the watch onto her wrist, feeling its familiar weight. "Thank you, sir." Outside the administration building, she found her team waiting. Dan, Frank, Mari, and Dave, all looking somewhat worse for wear but standing tall despite everything they had endured. And with them, to her surprise, stood Airman Santos and Lieutenant Taylor, the young pilot they had rescued from the storm. Taylor stepped forward, still moving carefully due to his injured leg. "Major Harrison," he said formally, then broke into a smile. "My father told me what you did, what all of you did." "We did what anyone would do," she replied. "No," Dan countered quietly. "We did what the right people would do. There's a difference." They moved together across the base toward the officers' club, a group bound by more than rank or unit now, bound by shared purpose, and the knowledge that they had stood firm when principles demanded action over obedience. The coming weeks would bring hearings, testimony, and likely significant changes to their military careers. Some doors would close permanently, but as Kate looked at the team around her, she felt a certainty that transcended those concerns. In the critical moment, they had made the right choice, the only choice that would have allowed them to look in the mirror afterward. They had refused to leave their fellow pilots behind, both physically in the storm-swept valley and metaphorically in the fight for truth that followed. As they entered the officers' club, conversation momentarily stilled as heads turned toward them. Then, remarkably, one pilot stood and began to applaud. Others joined, the gesture spreading across the room until they faced a standing ovation from their peers, the most meaningful judgment they could receive. Kate felt Dan's hand on her shoulder, grounding her in the moment. "Your father would be proud," he said simply. "Damn proud." She touched her father's watch, thinking of everything that had led to this point. His sacrifice 30 years ago, her own journey through the Air Force, and the storm that had brought them all together in a crucible of wind, sand, and difficult choices. Some storms, she reflected, came to destroy, but others came to clear away what was false, leaving only what was strong enough to endure. Their storm had done both, threatening lives while ultimately exposing a truth too long buried. As the applause faded and they joined their fellow officers, Kate knew that whatever came next, whatever official judgments were rendered or career limitations imposed, they had already received the verdict that mattered most. They had honored the highest calling of their service, not blind obedience to orders, but unwavering commitment to the lives and safety of those who served alongside them. In the end, that was the legacy her father had left her, a compass that pointed not to advancement or acclaim, but to the harder path of doing what was right, even when it came at personal cost. 3 seconds to decide, she murmured, recalling his words. A lifetime to live with it. In those critical moments over Death Valley, she had made her decision. And now, surrounded by her team and acknowledged by her peers, she knew it was one she could live with for all the years to come. The storm had passed, and they had emerged not unscathed but unbroken, their bonds stronger, their purpose clearer than ever before. Whatever darkness had surrounded her father's death, she had brought light to it at last. Whatever shadows had concealed the truth about Blackout, they had dispelled them together. Some storms, after all, carried not just destruction, but also the seeds of renewal. As Kate looked around at her team, now family in all the ways that truly mattered, she recognized that this storm had forged something that would endure long after the thunder faded and the skies cleared. It had forged a truth that could no longer be buried, and a bond that could never be broken. A note from the author. Dear reader, thank you for journeying through this story with Kate Harrison and her courageous team. Writing this tale has been a deeply personal experience for me, one that explores themes I believe resonate with many of us, especially those who have served or have loved ones in uniform. At its heart, this is a story about the weight of legacy and the courage to forge your own path while honoring those who came before. Kate carries her father's watch, a symbol of both burden and inspiration, throughout her journey. Like many of us in our 50s and beyond, she understands that we don't escape our past. We learn to carry it with grace while still making our own choices. I wanted to explore what happens when duty and conscience collide, when following orders means betraying your values. These aren't abstract questions for our generation. Many of you served during Vietnam, the Gulf War, or other conflicts where the right choice wasn't always clear. You understand that courage isn't about following the easy path. It's about standing firm when everything tells you to stand down. The relationship between Kate and her team represents something I think we sometimes lose sight of in our individualistic culture: the power of chosen family. These aren't people bound by blood, but by shared values and mutual respect. They risk everything for each other not because they have to, but because they choose to. In a world that often feels increasingly fragmented, I hope this story reminds us of the enduring power of loyalty and fellowship. I also wanted to write a story that honors the complexity of military leadership. General Reynolds isn't a simple villain or hero. He's a man caught between institutional constraints and personal conscience, trying to navigate a system that doesn't always reward integrity. That gray zone between right and wrong, where most of us actually live, felt important to explore. For those of you who served, I hope I've done justice to the unique bond between service members and the impossible choices you sometimes faced. For those who didn't serve but know someone who did, I hope this gives you a window into that world. And for all of us approaching or past retirement age, I hope Kate's journey reminds us that it's never too late to stand for what's right, that our choices still matter, and that courage doesn't diminish with age, it deepens. This story is also about unfinished business and second chances. Kate gets the opportunity to complete what her father started, to bring closure to a truth buried for decades. How many of us carry our own unfinished business? How many truths remain unspoken, wrongs unrighted, not because we lack the will but because we never found the right moment? This story is my reminder to myself, and perhaps to you, that sometimes we create the right moment by choosing to act. Thank you for spending time with these characters. Thank you for walking with Kate through that storm. And if this story stirred something in you, a memory, a regret, an inspiration, I hope you'll honor that feeling by taking whatever step, however small, toward your own truth. Some storms, after all, come not to destroy, but to reveal what truly matters. With deep respect and gratitude,